Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, The Watcher's Lair. I had always believed moving to the city would be a fresh start, a chance to carve out my own life. But as I stood in my new apartment, facing the cracked walls and the faint scent of mildew that clung stubbornly to the air, that belief started to feel naive. The cheap rent came at a price, and I quickly learned that my neighbors were no ordinary residents. It began on my first night. I settled in with a takeout box of cold noodles, the soft glow of a single lamp illuminating my sparse living room. I tried to ignore the unsettling creaks and groans of the old building, convincing myself that it was just part of the charm. But as I turned my head to look out the window, I spotted him, the man in the opposite building, standing motionless in his dim apartment, his gaze fixed intently on me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just curious about the new tenant. But as the days passed, I found his presence more unnerving. Each time I glanced out, he was there. He didn't wave or nod, he simply watched, his features partially obscured by the light casting shadows across his face. The unease settled in my stomach like a stone. The building had a peculiar layout, and my windows were positioned directly across from his. This proximity felt invasive. I pulled the curtain shut, hoping to shield myself from his unyielding stare. Still, the sensation of being watched lingered like an unwelcome ghost. Weeks rolled by, and the routine became suffocating. I would leave for work in the morning, and when I'd return, he would be there, always waiting, always watching. I began to feel like a character in a dreadful play, with no exit and no audience but him. My friends reassured me, laughed off my worries, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel the prickling sensation of his gaze crawling over my skin. One evening, the tension reached a breaking point. I had just returned home from a long day, exhausted and worn thin, when I noticed the curtains of his apartment had fallen open wider than usual. I could see him now, sitting in the same spot, utterly still. Something snapped inside me. I couldn't call the police. There was no tangible evidence. It was a feeling, a haunting that burrowed deep within me. Determined, I decided to confront him. My heart raced as I climbed the stairs to his floor. It felt absurd, but maybe he was just a lonely man who needed a friendly conversation. I knocked on his door, hesitating only for a moment before the sound echoed down the hallway. Silence responded. I knocked again, harder this time, and heard the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps. The door creaked open, revealing a man whose features were as unsettling as they were ordinary. He was unkempt, his hair disheveled, eyes wide and unblinking. "Can I help you?" His voice was soft, almost too soft, as though he hadn't spoken in a long time. I swallowed, suddenly unsure of my plan. "I'm your neighbor. I just wanted to introduce myself. You've been watching me a lot. It feels uncomfortable." His gaze flickered, a hint of surprise breaking through his stoic facade. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just like to observe." I forced a smile, trying to exude a calm that I didn't feel. "Observe what, exactly?" "I don't mean to pry, but it's hard to ignore someone watching from across the street." His lips curled into a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just a collector of moments. The world outside is fascinating." The words struck me as odd. The way he said them felt rehearsed, as if he had prepared for this very conversation. My instinct screamed at me to leave. "I see. Well, I hope maybe we can share a cup of coffee sometime. Get to know each other?" There was a pregnant pause before he replied, "Perhaps." I nodded, stepping back as an invisible wall formed between us. Okay, then. Good night. I retreated to my apartment, the door clicking shut behind me while my heart raced. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away, and a fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. The encounter had left me unsettled, but it also ignited a spark of curiosity. For weeks after, the watching continued, but I found myself unable to abandon the thought of confronting him again. In a moment of reckless bravery, I decided to snoop. It felt foolish, but the urge clawed at me from the inside, relentless and insatiable. One night, I waited until it was dark enough to shadow myself against the walls of the dim hallway. My heart thudded like a drum as I creaked open the door to his apartment, my breath hitching in my throat. The smell hit me first, a suffocating odor of dust and something else I couldn't quite place. The worst part was the silence. It felt like an entity of its own, heavy and oppressive. I moved deeper into the apartment, and my fingers brushed against the peeling paint of the walls. Then I saw a door slightly ajar at the end of the narrow hallway. Pushing the door wider, I stepped inside, and the sight that met my eyes froze me in place. The room was cluttered with photographs, piles upon piles of carefully arranged images covered the walls, and they all showed me. My heart dropped into my stomach as I realized the extent of his fixation. There I was, captured in countless mundane moments, walking to the grocery store, reading on my couch, even glimpses of my face without my noticing. It felt like I was trapped inside a nightmare, cut off from reality. The sweet scent of popcorn from my apartment wafted through the air, but all I could taste was dread. The photographs burrowed deep into my mind, each one a reminder that I was never truly alone. I stepped back, panic clawing at my throat, desperate to escape. But before I could turn, I heard the soft sound of a door clicking shut behind me. The days unfolded like a slow, creeping fog, a haze of the mundane that clung to my new life in the apartment. I settled into the rhythm of my surroundings, filled my shelves with books, and tried to decorate the bare walls. Yet, the dark shadow of my neighbor's gaze loomed heavily over my sense of comfort. I attempted to brush it aside, attributing his watching to mere curiosity. After all, I was the new arrival in a place where everyone else seemed to already know each other. Mornings drifted into afternoons, and I grew accustomed to the feeling of being observed. Each time I caught a glimpse of him through the sheer curtains that separated our apartments, my stomach twisted with an unsettling mix of anxiety and anger. I had avoided eye contact, convinced that breaking the invisible barrier would only amplify my discomfort. But the more I avoided him, the more I felt his eyes upon me. On Thursday evening, after a long day at work, I returned home and flopped onto the couch. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room. The light was fading, but I could still see his silhouette flitting behind the curtain next door. It was then that a spark ignited in my chest, a mix of courage and frustration. I couldn't let this continue. It was time to confront him. I knocked on the wall that separated our apartments, the sound echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. When no response came, I hesitated, feeling the adrenaline surge through me. I wasn't sure if I was more scared or emboldened by the moment. I pushed the thought of retreating aside and resolved to go next door. I walked to his door, the hallway dimly lit and breathing a history of unspoken secrets. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock. I couldn't turn back. The noise echoed, loud in the stillness. Moments passed, each second elongated like a rubber band stretched to its limit before the door creaked open. There he stood, the neighbor, a gaunt figure framed by the dim interior of his apartment. His eyes widened at the sight of me, a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Or something darker? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, glancing back into his apartment as if expecting someone to intervene. "Sure," he eventually replied, stepping aside. "Come in." As I crossed the threshold, a wave of unease swept over me. The light in his apartment was dim, cast by a single lamp that provided too little illumination. The air felt heavy, laden with the scent of stale food and something acrid, like burnt rubber. I glanced around, trying to focus my gaze on anything but him. "Ah, sorry about watching you. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice low and drawn out. I detected an almost rehearsed quality to his words, as though he'd said them many times before. I nodded, trying to gauge his sincerity. It's unsettling. I'm not used to it." He shifted slightly, fidgeting with a frayed edge of a worn-out sofa. "I get it. It's just, you moved in, and I've been curious about you. It's a small building." Curiosity, I thought, was a benign excuse, but there was something about the way he spoke that sent a chill down my spine. I took a breath, searching for the right words. "Could you at least try to keep the curtains closed?" He nodded, and I felt a rush of relief mingle with the anxiety still swirling inside me. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye: an open door off to the side, half hidden in shadows. "What's in there?" I asked, pointing. The moment the question left my lips, I regretted it. It was an invasion of his privacy, but the urge to know overpowered my hesitation. His expression shifted, a quick, flickering shadow crossing his features. "Nothing," he said too quickly. I took a step toward the door, driven by a morbid curiosity. "Are you sure? It looks like—" "Just a storage room," he interrupted, his voice strained. "Not for you to see." My heart raced as I watched him tense. Why was he so guarded? Something in the air shifted, the atmosphere thickening with unspoken truths. I could feel the weight of his presence, the way he loomed behind me like a predator. "Please," I said, turning to face him fully, the resolve hardening in my gut. "I'm just trying to understand." His eyes darkened, and for a moment, I lost the breath in my lungs. "Understanding isn't always safe," he whispered. Before I could respond, he stepped forward and abruptly closed the door to the room. A faint click echoed, sealing what lay beyond from my view. A pulse of dread coursed through me, and I instinctively stepped back. As I retreated, I caught one last glimpse of the door before the shadows swallowed it whole. I had crossed a line, and I felt it in the very marrow of my bones. I forced myself to smile, to mask the rising panic, but as I walked away, I could still feel his eyes boring into me. Back in my apartment, the silence rang in my ears. I paced the floor, my mind racing. What lurked beyond that closed door? I wrestled with thoughts of what I had seen, the photographs, the potential horrors hidden behind that threshold. The weight of his gaze had been more than mere curiosity. It was as if he had collected pieces of me, each glance a snapshot, each moment a chilling testament of his fixation. As I lay in bed that night, rest eluded me. Sleep felt like a distant memory, each creak of the building echoing through my restless mind. I could almost hear the soft rustle of his curtains drawn back, the unmistakable feeling of being watched bearing down on me. And so I lay there, caught in the grip of fear, knowing I needed to uncover the truth but terrified of what it might reveal. I forced myself to approach the door again, glancing nervously at the neighboring unit. The corridor felt like it had shrunk around me, the walls pressing in as if they held their breath. Each step toward the door sent a chill down my spine, but I had to confront the truth. I couldn't let the shadow of his gaze linger in my mind any longer. The photographs I had glimpsed in his hidden room haunted me, a collection of stolen moments that turned the mundane into something sinister. As I raised my hand to knock, I hesitated, my thoughts swirling. Who was he really? The amiable smile he wore during our brief encounters seemed to peel away, revealing something darker beneath. His apartment had been a gallery of my life, an unsettling shrine to my routines and secrets. I knocked, the sound echoing off the walls like a gunshot in the silence. Silence answered. My heart raced as I waited, the passing moments stretching into an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open, and there he stood, Mr. Rains, the neighbor I had grown to dread. He looked disheveled, his shirt wrinkled and unkempt hair falling over his forehead. But it was his eyes that held me. They glinted with an unsettling mix of curiosity and something that felt like hunger. "Hello, Rachel," he said, his voice low and smooth. The way he said my name sent a shiver through me. It felt too intimate, too familiar. "What brings you here?" I blinked, trying to steady my breath. I wanted to talk. About the photographs. His expression shifted, the veneer of friendliness began to crack. "Photographs? What do you mean?" I stepped back slightly, retreating into the hallway's gloom. "The ones you have in your apartment. The ones you took of me." He laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. "You must be mistaken. I don't know what you're talking about." The shadows in the corridor deepened, and I felt the weight of his gaze pressing against me like a physical force. "Please, I saw them. I want to understand why you have them." For a moment, silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. I could see his mind racing, calculating his response. I hoped for a sign of humanity, a flicker of remorse, but instead, his face hardened, and a strange smile crept onto his lips. "You shouldn't pry into things that don't concern you, Rachel." I pressed on, my voice trembling but resolute. "It does concern me. You're watching me. It's not normal." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I watch because I find you fascinating, dear Rachel. But you need to be careful about what you say. You might not like where that curiosity leads you." There was a menacing undertone to his words that sent ice racing through my veins. I turned to leave, the instinct to flee kicking in hard. But just as I turned, he continued, his voice softer but insistent. "Are you sure you want to leave? You haven't seen everything yet." Before I could react, he reached forward, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Panic surged as I tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened. "You're safe here, you know," he said, his eyes narrowing, unwavering. "I only want to protect you." It took every ounce of resolve I had to pull free from his grasp. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I rushed down the hall. The moment I turned the corner, I broke into a sprint, propelled by fear and adrenaline. I didn't stop until I reached the sanctuary of my own apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against the door, breathing heavily, every sound in the building amplified in my ears. The world outside felt foreign, the air thick with a sense of menace that hung over me. I fought back tears, my thoughts racing. I had to do something. I had to alert someone, but who would believe me? After a few shaky moments, I logged into my computer and began searching for resources on stalking, hoping to find some sort of validation for my fears. As I scrolled through articles, horror stories echoed in my mind, victims written off as paranoid or delusional. I couldn't let that be me. Just then, a soft knock echoed from my door. My heart froze in my chest. I glanced at the peephole, my breath hitching in my throat. It was him, Mr. Rains, standing there, brows furrowed as if he could feel the weight of my gaze on him. The familiar smile was gone, replaced by an unsettling seriousness. I backed away from the door, my pulse racing. I should call the police, I thought, but part of me could not bring myself to do it. What evidence did I have other than my own growing paranoia? He had a way of making me doubt myself, twisting reality into something I couldn't understand. The knocking persisted, more insistent this time. I could not face him again. I moved further into my apartment, searching for something, anything that could give me strength. My eyes landed on the kitchen knife, gleaming in the dim light. I gripped it tightly, my mind racing with possibilities. "Rachel," he called softly through the door. "Please, just listen to me." The sound of his voice made my blood run cold. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping the shadows would swallow me whole. He was playing with my fear, twisting it like a marionette, and I felt like a puppet, dancing to his tune. "I won't hurt you," he continued, his voice dropping to a coaxing murmur. "I just want to talk. You don't have to be afraid." And there it was, the lure of his charm, the twisted kindness hiding a terrifying truth. I couldn't trust him, but I felt the weight of his presence on the other side of the door, like a predator waiting for its moment to strike. "No!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Leave me alone." The knocking stopped, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of retreating footsteps, but instead, I heard him whisper, "You can't hide forever, Rachel." I didn't want to think about what that meant. I only knew one thing: whatever twisted game he was playing, I had to find a way to escape it. The photograph collection wasn't just a record of my life, it was a warning. I had to uncover his secrets before he could find a way to trap me in his web of darkness. The hunt had begun, and I was determined to survive. I had tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, attributing it to my overactive imagination fueled by the shadows that danced in my new apartment. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, that nagging sensation morphed into something deeper, a creeping dread that settled in my bones. The neighbor, Mr. Hargrove, had become an increasingly unsettling presence. I had observed him through the thin curtain of my living room window. He was often there, leaning against his frame, gaze fixed on me. Confrontation clawed at my brain like an animal trapped in a cage. Each day, I had tried to convince myself that he was simply curious. New neighbors were always a topic of interest, weren't they? But curiosity didn't explain the way his eyes lingered, how they followed my movements with an unsettling intensity, as if I were a character in a story he relished reading. On a rain-soaked Thursday evening, I stood at my window, watching him as he stood in the dim light of his apartment, a silhouette against the walls. A part of me wanted to flee from the spectacle, to retreat into the safe confines of my own space. But another part, fueled by a mix of indignation and fear, urged me to confront him. I dressed deliberately, choosing a pale blue blouse that contrasted with the growing darkness of the evening. My reflection seemed to mock me as I adjusted my hair. What was I planning to say? Maybe I'd start with a simple hello and let it drift from there. I felt foolish for even considering knocking on his door, but the gnawing anxiety had reached a fever pitch. I marched down the narrow hallway, my heart pounding like a war drum as I approached his door. I raised my hand, hesitated, then knocked on the weathered wood. The sound echoed, swallowed by the silence of the building. Moments passed, and I almost turned to leave when I heard the shuffling of feet. The door creaked open. Mr. Hargrove stood before me, a tall man with disheveled hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to scrutinize my very being. He wore a loose-fitting sweater, its colors muted and blending into the darkened space behind him. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, almost gravelly. Hi. I'm your neighbor from down the hall." I've noticed you watching me." The admission tumbled out before my mind could catch up. His expression remained unreadable, but an almost imperceptible twitch of his lips suggested amusement or perhaps annoyance. "I watch a lot of things. It's what you do when you live alone." I swallowed. I just thought it was a bit strange, you know? He leaned slightly against the doorframe, his posture relaxed and yet predatory. "Strange how?" I felt my face flush. "I mean, it's unusual to stare at someone, especially a neighbor." The corner of his mouth twitched upward again, and he pushed the door open slightly more, revealing an apartment that was darker than I expected. "You're welcome to come in if you want. It's not what you think." Something in his voice sent a chill down my spine, but curiosity urged me forward. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. The room was dimly lit, the light struggling to penetrate the shadows. My gaze darted around the space, taking in the clutter, the stacks of newspapers, boxes piled high, and a faint scent of mildew that clung to the air. "What do you do in here?" I asked, attempting to keep my tone steady. "Just observing," he replied, his eyes narrowing as he pointed toward a door at the far end of the apartment. "Do you want to see something?" I hesitated. The air felt thick with unspoken words and unshed secrets. "Trust me," he insisted, his voice smooth yet edged with something darker. Something compelled me to nod, and he led me toward the door. I barely took a breath as he swung it open. The sight that met my eyes sent my stomach lurching into my throat. The room was small, and every inch of wall space was covered in photographs, dozens of them, hundreds, maybe more. I stepped inside, my heart racing as I scanned the images. They were all of me sitting at my kitchen table, walking my dog in the park, even bending over to pick up the mail. The photographs were taken from various angles, some with a distance that suggested a long lens, others up close, capturing expressions I had no idea were being observed. As I turned to face him, the realization hit like a blow. "What is this? Why do you have these?" My voice trembled, a mix of shock and horror. "Art," he stated simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're inspiring. Each shot is just a moment I wanted to keep." "Keep? You're stalking me." He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting, as if he were a predator reveling in the fear he had instigated. "Stalking suggests I'm a threat. I'm not a threat, Emily. I'm just documenting beauty." I felt the room closing in around me, suffocating under the weight of his gaze. "This isn't beauty," I gasped, backing away. "This is wrong." "Is it?" he asked, tilting his head, a smile creeping across his lips. "Or is it just a different perspective?" I turned swiftly, darting toward the door, and he moved to block my path. My heart raced, panic flooding my veins. "You can't keep doing this." His smile faltered for an instant, replaced by a hard glare. "You should have just let me observe in peace." In that moment, I realized the man standing in front of me did not see me as a neighbor but as an object to be possessed, a canvas for his twisted artistry. It became clear that I needed to escape this room, this apartment, this building altogether. With every ounce of adrenaline surging through me, I pushed past him, bursting into the hallway and racing toward the exit. I could hear his footsteps trailing behind me, the door slamming against the wall as I sprinted down the stairs and out into the rain-soaked street. Outside, the world felt alive, every raindrop a reminder that I was free, but the terror of what I had just discovered clung to my skin like a second layer. I had stepped into a nightmare, and it was far from over. The air in the hallway felt thick and stale as I stepped out of my apartment, heart pounding in my chest. It had been nearly a week since I had first caught a glimpse of him, Mr. Jenkins, my reclusive neighbor, peering at me through the window, his gaunt face half shrouded in shadow. The memory of his cold stare sent a chill down my spine. I had tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was overreacting, but the unease had festered, each glance from him burrowing deeper into my thoughts. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit and oddly silent. I could hear the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead, a mechanical drone that felt unsettling in the absence of any other sounds. I had chosen today to confront him. I had rehearsed my words, practiced my stance in front of the mirror multiple times, yet as I stood outside his door, my resolve faltered. I raised my hand and knocked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet corridor. No response came, just the feeling of loneliness wrapping around me like a shroud. I waited a moment longer, the silence stretching, then knocked again, a bit harder this time. Finally, the door creaked open. Mr. Jenkins stood there, his disheveled hair hanging over his pale forehead, eyes blinking at me through thick glasses. I mustered a smile that felt foreign on my lips, hoping to ease the tension between us. "Hi. I'm your neighbor, Lily. I wanted to talk." He eyed me warily, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, as though contemplating whether to shut the door or let me in. "What is it?" His voice was low and gravelly, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "I've noticed you watching me," I said, forcing the words out. "From your window. It's made me a little uncomfortable, and I thought we could talk about it." His expression darkened, and for a moment, I saw an unsettling flicker of anger in his eyes. It disappeared just as quickly, replaced by an unsettling calm. "I assure you, I have no ill intentions," he replied, the corners of his mouth twitching into what I supposed was meant to be a smile. "Why don't you come in? We can discuss it further." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to walk away from that door and never look back, but part of me was curious, yearning to understand the man behind the unsettling gaze. I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tightly, allowing only slivers of light to filter through. My eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the strange collection of items scattered around the small space. Books teetered precariously on the edge of shelves, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. The air smelled of something acrid, a mix of old paper and stale sweat. "Please, have a seat." He gestured toward a worn-out armchair, fabric threadbare and faded. I chose to stand instead, my skin prickling as I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye, a framed photograph on the wall. I moved closer, my heart sinking as I recognized the image. It was me, standing outside my apartment, taken from the angle of his window. "Why do you have this?" I asked, my voice shaky. Mr. Jenkins shuffled closer, an unsettling smile creeping onto his face. "I like to document things. Moments." His words dripped with a strange enthusiasm. "You see, I'm an artist of sorts." "An artist?" I echoed, though I barely believed him. "Yes, but not in the conventional sense." His gaze shifted to a door at the back of the room, slightly ajar. "Would you like to see my work?" A sense of dread washed over me, but I felt an irresistible pull to discover what lay beyond that door. I nodded, barely able to form words. He opened the door wider, revealing a small, dark room that smelled of damp earth and something rotten. I stepped over the threshold, the light from the hallway barely illuminating the space. My pulse quickened as I saw the walls covered in photographs, dozens, hundreds, pinned up like trophies. Each image was of me, cooking in my kitchen, walking my dog in the park, sitting on my couch reading a book. I felt my stomach churn as I realized he had been documenting my every move, capturing my life without my consent. "Isn't it beautiful?" he breathed, his eyes gleaming with manic delight. "Everything is art if you look closely enough. You're the perfect subject." Backing away, I felt a wave of panic. "This isn't art. This is invasive. You need to stop this. It's wrong." He stepped closer, blocking my way out, his expression shifting from admiration to something darker. "You don't understand. You're special to me. You're my muse." I felt the walls closing in on me, the air thick and stifling. Desperation clawed at my throat, and with a surge of adrenaline, I shoved past him, racing down the narrow hallway and slamming into the front door. It felt stuck, a locked barrier between me and escape. "Lily, "Wait," he called, but the urgency of his voice only propelled me forward. I flung the door open and bolted into the hallway, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop running until I was safe in my own apartment, locked away from the horrors I had just witnessed. I leaned against the door, my hands trembling as I fought to catch my breath. I wanted to convince myself that it was over, but deep down, I knew it was just the beginning. The neighbor's secret had been revealed, but the fear it instilled in me was now inescapable, a shadow that clung to me, waiting for the next moment to strike. Story 2, Chased Through the Dark. The headlights pierced the darkness in a narrow beam, struggling against the shadows of the tall pines lining the road. I had never intended to take that detour, but the GPS had recalculated my route after I'd missed my exit. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 12:47 a.m. Too late for a shortcut, but my impatience won out. The temptation of speeding home with the warmth of my bed waiting was stronger than the gnawing instinct that told me to turn back. The winding road was hardly more than a stretch of gravel, and the trees pressed in from both sides, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers grasping for the car. The radio played an old country song, but it felt jarring in the stillness of the night. I switched it off, opting instead to listen to the sounds of the darkness enveloping me. I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour when I caught the flickering of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought little of it. Someone else must have taken the same ill-advised route. But as the truck closed the distance between us, a shiver of unease settled in my stomach. The vehicle was a hulking mass, its front grille a menacing shadow that loomed over mine. The driver had kept his distance at first, but now he was on my tail, close enough to make me uneasy. I pressed the gas pedal, hoping to shake him off. The engine roared in response, but the truck remained steadfast, a dark predator, relentless in its pursuit. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just another driver, perhaps lost like I was. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening under the strain. Turning onto another winding curve, I felt a tingle of panic creep over me as the truck mirrored my movements. I cursed under my breath. It was as if it had been waiting for my every turn. A little voice in the back of my mind whispered that I should have never taken this road, that I should have turned back the moment I sensed something wasn't right. The trees began to thin, and I caught a glimpse of the moon through the branches. For a brief moment, a sense of relief washed over me. Perhaps I could lose him in the open. But as I pressed harder on the gas, the truck followed suit, its headlights blinding me as I glanced back. My heart raced. I was caught in some twisted game, and I was losing. I made another turn, desperate to outsmart my shadow. The truck was a specter of my own fear, its presence turning the air in the car thick and suffocating. I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence, that it wouldn't follow me forever. But every turn I took felt like an invitation to doom, each maneuver met with the relentless glow of those headlights. The road dipped down into a hollow, the darkness swallowing me whole. I could feel the tension in my chest rise with every passing second. I knew rationally that I was just being paranoid, yet the way that truck shifted as I did unsettled me. I glanced at my phone, no signal. An icy wave of dread washed over me. I was truly alone out here. I turned again, this time taking a sharp left, hoping to lose him in the maze of dirt roads that wove in between the fields. But the truck remained, a phantom hitching a ride in my mind, and I could almost hear the thrum of its engine echoing my pounding heart. The moonlight illuminated the dirt, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the faint outline of something, a figure, perhaps standing among the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. I cursed myself for looking back. Focus. I told myself. I couldn't afford to let my imagination run wild. But every fiber of my being screamed a warning, and the remaining rational thought began to fray. Why wouldn't he pass me? Was he waiting for me to make a mistake? I could feel the air in the car grow thick, almost suffocating. As I approached a clearing, the road opened up, and I finally saw something ahead, a sign. Relief surged through me, an escape, a path back to familiar territory. But as I made for it, I stole another glance in the rearview mirror and froze. The truck had sped up, its headlights blaring like a warning signal. I feared sharply, instincts kicking in. I had to break away. But the truck matched my pace, its monstrous presence growing larger in the mirror as it closed in on me. Panic gripped me as I darted left again, dodging deeper into the woods, praying for a twist in the road that might finally lose him. The forest swallowed me once more, a claustrophobic tunnel of shadows and menace. I could hear the gravel crunch beneath my tires, the echoes of the truck behind me now louder, more pronounced. Was he gaining on me? I had no way to know. My heartbeat filled the silence, a rapid drumroll to the impending climax of the nightmare. Then, just ahead, the road forked, a choice to make. I could veer right and plunge deeper into the unknown, or head left toward familiar territory, risking a chance he'd follow. I took a sharp breath, making a decision that felt monumental even in my frantic state. Left. I would make for home, whatever the cost. As I turned, the headlights flared behind me, blinding. The truck seemed to roar with fury, the sound cutting through the night like a jagged knife of fear. I pressed on, knowing every moment spent under those glaring lights tightened the noose around my sanity. It wasn't just a chase anymore, it was a test of my resolve. I couldn't afford to look back. I had to believe I could outdrive this nightmare. My house was only a few miles away. Maybe I could make it. But every turn, every jolt of the road ahead, brought with it the looming shadow of doubt. Would I become just another ghost on this desolate road, forever etched into the darkness? The thought chilled me to the bone as I pressed the gas and let adrenaline guide me deeper into the night. The tension in my chest had tightened like a vice after I took that shortcut. It was supposed to be a simple detour, a mere 5 minutes shaved off the drive home. The moon hung high like a cold eye, illuminating the twisted path ahead, flanked by gnarled trees that seemed to clutch at the air with skeletal fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had wandered too far from civilization, the comforting lights of the town swallowed by the embrace of darkness. As I drove, the engine's hum was punctuated by an unsettling rhythm, the growl of a truck engine. I glanced in my rearview mirror, heart sinking. A pair of headlights loomed behind me, harsh and unyielding. The truck had appeared out of nowhere, a hulking silhouette that matched my speed, inching closer with each passing moment. I attempted to dismiss the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe he was just another driver, perhaps lost like me, but intuition whispered otherwise. I pressed down on the accelerator, urging my little sedan to push against the palpable fear. Curves in the road flickered by, the trees bending like shadows, and still, the truck followed. Every time I turned, he adapted, the light slicing through the darkness and batting against my shoulders, reminding me I was not alone. I tried to rationalize the situation. It was late. Maybe he was heading home, too, just a man in a big truck, but the creeping sensation in my gut told me otherwise. I picked up speed, the engine whining, hoping to outpace him. But with every surge, he mirrored my frantic tempo, like some monstrous predator playing with its prey. The road became narrower, bordered by thick brush and the occasional crumbling fence, an unwelcome reminder that I was alone in this desolate stretch of rural nothingness. I could almost feel the weight of his headlights on my back, a burning scrutiny that sent chills racing down my arms. I tried to remember the last time I had seen another car, another soul, but the memory slipped away like sand in an hourglass. My heart raced as I took another turn, desperate to break free from the truck's relentless pursuit. To my horror, the vehicle remained steadfast behind me, relentless as a shadow. I could not fathom how he maintained this pace, even as the road twisted and turned like a serpent. Was he toying with me? Did he know I was frightened? A flicker of thought darted through my mind. Could I stop and confront him? Call for help? But the idea of halting in this remote spot, where the only reply to my cries would be the echo of my own voice, sent shivers down my spine. I pressed on, praying for a sign of life, a glimpse of distant headlights, anything but this looming presence. I rounded yet another corner, and my heart sank as I saw a fork in the road. Panic set in. One path continued along the edges of a darkened forest, while the other appeared to lead to an overgrown field. I had to decide quickly. I chose the forest. The trees stood sentry like guards, a desperate hope that someone lived nearby in that enveloping darkness. As I dove off the main road, the truck followed, tires crunching over gravel, and my heart plummeted into my stomach. The branches loomed, closing in as if trying to trap me, and I felt the presence of the truck inching closer, its headlights piercing the thickening blackness. His shadow loomed long against the trees, a specter that taunted my every decision. The road narrowed, the underbrush closing in, and I cursed myself for not bringing my phone. I had meant to charge it before I left, but I had thought it unnecessary for such a short trip. Now, I was utterly alone. I could almost feel the truck's engine growling behind me, insatiable like a beast hungering for my fear. I glanced at the rearview mirror, my breath hitching as I met the unyielding gaze of headlights. They were impossibly close now, and my instinct screamed at me to accelerate further. I slammed the gas pedal down, the speedometer needle climbing, but the truck surged forward, keeping pace as if mocking my desperation. I was running out of options. Trees blurred past, and branches scratched at my windows like skeletal hands trying to pull me into their grasp. I made a hard left onto a dirt path, kicking up dust and gravel, praying that this would lead me somewhere safe. But the headlights remained steadfast, carving a path through the darkness behind me, each heartbeat drumming a frantic tempo. Desperation clawed at my throat. I had to do something. I needed to lose him. I twisted the steering wheel sharply, veering onto a more secluded path, anxiety pushing me to the limit. The truck echoed behind me, unwavering, a relentless specter that had no intention of letting go. A tight knot of dread wound itself tighter in my chest as I caught a glimpse of something in the headlights, a shape in the road ahead. It was small at first, and then it registered with horrifying clarity, a figure, standing alone in the middle of the path. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the gravel, sending up a storm of dust and debris. In that moment of chaos, the headlights behind me illuminated the figure, a woman, her face blank, hair a cascade of shadow. It was then I truly understood the horror that engulfed me. The truck hadn't been chasing me for fear. It was just the beginning of something much more sinister. The woman raised her hand slowly, as if inviting me toward her, beckoning me deeper into the night. With that chilling gesture, I felt the last vestiges of hope fading into darkness, leaving only despair in its wake. The air inside my car felt dense as I drove down the narrow rural road, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. I had never taken this shortcut before, yet the allure of a quicker route home was too tempting to resist. The weight of the day rested on my shoulders, and I yearned to shed it, to step out of the car and into the familiar embrace of my living room. But that comfort was still miles away. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, a sound that seemed too loud in the dead of night. I noticed the trees lining the road, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers trying to snag my attention. I shook my head, brushing off the absurdity. This stretch of road was just desolate, nothing more. Nevertheless, an unsettling feeling crept into my stomach, a gnawing reminder that I was alone in a place that felt more like a prison than a shortcut. It happened without warning. I glanced into my rearview mirror and spotted the headlights of a truck tailgating me. My heart quickened, the beat echoing in my ears. What kind of idiot drove so close in the dark? I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, hoping to lose the truck in the curve ahead. As I turned, I dared to look back. The truck was still there, its lights unblinking, unwavering in their pursuit. I had entered a game I never wanted to play. The paranoia curled around my mind like smoke, twisting and suffocating. Each time I turned, the truck mirrored my movements, keeping me trapped in its shadow. I felt like a marionette, strings pulled taut by unseen hands, clutching the steering wheel as if it might offer me some semblance of control. This is ridiculous, I muttered to myself, willing logic to overpower the rising tide of fear. Surely this was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver was just as lost as I was, wanting to get home after a long day. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but something deep inside whispered otherwise, hinting at a sinister reality that sent chills racing down my spine. The engine roared as I accelerated again, but my heart sank as the truck kept pace. I turned sharply down another winding stretch, the tires skidding slightly on the gravel. I glanced in the mirror again, and there it was, relentless as a shadow. My hands gripped the wheel harder, knuckles white under the fluorescent light of the dashboard. I considered stopping, pulling over to let the truck pass, but dread seeped into my thoughts. What if the driver stepped out? What if I made the wrong choice? The cabin felt claustrophobic, the air thick and stifling, drenched in anxiety. All I wanted was to be home, but each twist and turn only tightened the noose of my fear. I took a deep breath, attempting to ground myself. The trees, dark sentinels on either side of the road, loomed larger, their shapes grotesque in the headlights. I tried to focus on the end of the road, to envision my driveway and the safety of my house, but that image faded as quickly as it came, clouded by the looming presence of that truck. Then it happened. A glance in the rearview mirror revealed something far more unsettling than mere headlights. The truck had moved closer, almost as if it was daring me to look away. My stomach churned, and I found myself speeding up once more. The faster I drove, the more the fear clawed at me, whispering that I might not make it home at all. As I took another curve, I saw something glinting in the dark, a snap of light reflecting off something metallic. My heart raced. Was I imagining things, or was there something out of place? I squinted, searching for the source, determined to dismiss the panic. But the moments stretched into eternity, each fraction of a second amplifying my paranoia. Suddenly, the truck's headlights flickered. It was a brief flash, but it felt like a signal, an agreement made between us, and dread wrapped its fingers around my throat. What did it mean? Was it a warning or a threat? The road widened slightly ahead, and I felt a desperate urge to escape, to put distance between myself and the looming presence behind me. I turned hard to the left, entering a less traveled path, hoping to lose the truck. As I navigated the new route, the sound of gravel under my tires became louder, more pronounced, as if the earth emphasized my isolation. I tried to collect my thoughts, but they scattered like leaves in the wind. I was surrounded by darkness, the shadows stretching and contracting as I sped past them. The truck pursued me, that familiar glow inching closer each time I glanced back. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was intentional, that the driver was playing a game with me, one I hadn't willingly entered. The trees seemed to bow and wail around me, and I could have sworn their whispering voices urged me to stop. But stopping was not an option. I had to keep moving. I took another sharp turn and nearly lost control, the rear of the car skidding out dangerously. The adrenaline surged in my veins as I steadied the wheel, my heart racing faster than the car could ever hope to go. The road before me was a blur of shadows and light, but in that moment, I knew I was no longer just trying to get home. I was running for my life. With every corner I turned, the truck mirrored my actions, relentless in its pursuit. I felt the walls closing in, the trees shifting like sentinels guarding a goal I could never reach. I had to find a way to lose it, I had to break free from this madness. But each passing second tightened the grip of dread, and all the while, the headlights of that truck remained fixed firmly in my rearview mirror, a haunting reminder that I might never escape. I had been driving for what felt like hours, the darkened landscape surrounding me melting into a formless void. The headlights of my car carved out patches of the road ahead, while the rest remained cloaked in a suffocating blackness that pressed against the glass. I was weary, both from the late hour and the weight of lingering dread that had settled into my bones since I took the detour. It was supposed to be a shortcut, but it had turned into a labyrinth of confusion. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I rounded another bend, the trees on either side leaning in as if to eavesdrop on my solitary journey. The air felt heavy, thick with a tension that made me uneasy. I glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed a pair of headlights glaring back at me. I frowned, my pulse quickening. A pickup truck had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and it was riding my tail far too closely. I tried to shake off the gnawing sense of paranoia creeping in. It was late, and I was on a deserted road. Perhaps this was just another lost soul looking for the same shortcuts I was. I pressed down on the accelerator, the car responding with a low growl as it surged ahead. But the truck wasn't far behind. Its headlights remained fixed on me, an unyielding eye in the dark. As I approached a fork in the road, I made a split-second decision, veering left into a narrower path overgrown with weeds. It felt reckless, but the unease had morphed into outright fear. The sound of gravel crunching under the truck's tires echoed like a drumbeat, intensifying my sense of being pursued. I stole another glance in the mirror. The truck had followed. The next turn was sharper. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. I could feel the tension coiling in my stomach, a knot that refused to loosen. Each turn I took, I half expected the truck to disappear, but it remained close. Just behind me, always ready to pounce, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. I pushed the gas pedal harder, my car whirring as if it were a living creature yearning to escape the unseen hunter. The trees began to thin out, and I caught sight of a distant light flickering. Relief flooded over me, but it was hollow, like a paper bag filled with air. What if the light was a trap? What if it drew me closer to danger instead of safety? Before I could think it through, I turned once more, the tires skidding slightly on the gravel as I rounded the corner. The truck was there, as if it had materialized from the shadows, bared its teeth, and snarled. I had a sinking feeling that it was more than just coincidence now. "Why won't you leave me alone?" I muttered under my breath, my voice cracking. I didn't dare look in the mirror again, fearing the sight of those headlights would immobilize me with fear. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, the light drawing closer, illuminating the contours of the landscape like a beacon of hope. With every turn, the light grew brighter, but so did the engine's growl behind me. I could hear the revving now, a sound that sent chills rushing down my spine. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 3 minutes had passed since I had first spotted the truck, but it felt like an eternity. I was trapped in a loop, a nightmare from which waking felt impossible. The light ahead proved to be a small roadside inn, its sign flickering sporadically like a dying firefly. I made a decision. Perhaps I could seek refuge there, talk to someone who could help me make sense of whatever the hell was going on. I turned sharply, my heart racing as I raced toward the entrance, but the truck wouldn't relent. It took the corner with me, its engine roaring louder, as if challenging my escape. In a rush of adrenaline, I pulled into the gravel driveway, gravel crunching beneath my tires as I parked haphazardly in front of the inn. I threw the car into park, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I wasn't safe yet. Not until I was inside. I leapt from the car, adrenaline propelling me toward the door, but I could feel the oppressive weight of the truck closing in. I dared a glance over my shoulder. The truck had stopped at the edge of the driveway, its engine idling ominously. The driver remained shrouded in shadow, but I could feel the stare boring into me. The abyss of the night seemed to close around me as I fumbled for the inn's handle. With a final burst of will, I yanked the door open and stumbled inside, the bell above chiming eerily as I crossed the threshold. The warmth of the interior was a stark contrast to the icy grip of fear that had shackled me outside. My eyes darted around the lobby, a small desk with a bell, a few faded armchairs, and a wall adorned with local memorabilia that seemed to watch me with suspicion. "Can I help you?" A woman appeared from behind the counter, her voice soothing yet tinged with a hint of wariness. Her eyes flicked to the door, as if sensing the danger still lurking outside. I struggled to form words, my mind racing. "There's a truck. It's been following me," I stammered, glancing back towards the door. "I don't know who it is, but..." The woman's expression shifted, her brows knitting together. "You should stay inside," she advised quietly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's not safe out there." I felt as if the walls were closing in around me. My stomach churned as I turned back toward the door, my breath hitching in my throat. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a murmur. "Because sometimes it's better not to know," she replied, her gaze unwavering, haunted. The bell above the door chimed again, and my heart sank as I realized the truck had arrived. I stood paralyzed, caught between the unknown inside and the terror waiting just outside the threshold. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth as I drove deeper into the rural road, the moon a thin sliver of silver barely illuminating the path ahead. Just minutes before, I had been wrapped in the comfort of the hum of my car's engine, the familiar streets of my town behind me. But that sense of security had evaporated as I stumbled upon the detour sign, a twisted beacon of misguided hope. I had heard stories about this road, how it twisted and turned like a snake, but the promise of a shortcut was too enticing to resist. The first few moments were uneventful. The road was narrow, flanked by towering trees that leaned inward, creating a claustrophobic tunnel. The headlights barely pierced the darkness beyond the reach of the asphalt. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the awareness of isolation creeping in as the ambient sounds of the night faded, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Then I noticed the headlights behind me, bright and unyielding. A truck. It had emerged from the shadows like a ghost, its presence almost oppressive in the rearview mirror. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to bad luck or coincidence. The road was long, and I was merely a solitary figure adrift in the dark. After a few minutes, however, I felt my heart race as the truck began to close the distance between us. The driver seemed relentless, tailgating me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, glancing at the speedometer. I was driving well within the limit, but it didn't seem to matter. The truck sat inches away from my rear bumper, a beast lurking in the shadows. The sensation of being hunted began to gnaw at my thoughts. With each bend in the road, I turned left, and the truck mirrored my movements, its headlights a constant reminder of my increasing paranoia. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that I was being ridiculous. It was just a coincidence, and I needed to focus on navigating this twisting path. But as I turned onto a sharper curve, I felt the weight of the truck's presence press harder on my chest. I could see its outline more clearly now. It was an old model, rusted and dark, the kind that looked menacing under the thin veil of moonlight. My mind raced with possibilities. What if this driver was just as lost as I was? Or worse, what if he wasn't lost at all? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to concentrate. The road ahead was dotted with potholes, a reminder of its abandonment. The trees seemed to close in tighter, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that threatened to swallow me whole. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and my stomach dropped. The truck was still there, its headlights glaring like cyclopean eyes, watching, waiting. I needed to get off this road. There had to be a side path or a place to pull over. My mind raced as I scanned the roadside, but all I saw were dark shapes and shadows. I kicked the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest. The truck responded to my speed, edging closer, inhaling the distance between us. I took another turn, desperate to shake the vehicle off my tail. Each bend seemed to stretch on forever. It felt like a labyrinth designed to ensnare me. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel, my heart thundering in my chest. Then, suddenly, a glimmer of light caught my eye, a clearing. Hope surged within me, and I swerved toward it, ready to escape the relentless pursuit. But as I approached, I saw it was just an abandoned farmhouse, its windows shattered like the hollow eyes of a long-dead creature. The yard was overgrown, a wild tangle of weeds reaching for the sky, and instinct warned me against stopping here. I hesitated, glancing in the mirror once more. The truck had not followed me into the clearing. Instead, it lingered at the edge of the road, its headlights casting an eerie glow over the scene. My breath quickened, and cold dread seeped into my bones as the driver's door swung open, revealing a figure cloaked in shadow. Without thinking, I slammed the car into reverse, barely glancing at the farmhouse as I tore back onto the road. The headlights of the truck flared to life as it pulled away from the clearing, following me once more as I barreled down the rural path. Panic surged through me, urging me to take another turn, another chance to escape. But the truck, relentless as the night itself, stayed on my tail. Each twist and turn of the path seemed to mock my attempts to flee. The trees whispered secrets around me, their branches stretching out like fingers, clawing at the air. I could feel my sanity fraying at the edges, each heartbeat punctuating the reality that there was no way out. Just then, I spotted a fork in the road ahead. The left path looked rough and unkempt, while the right was slightly more maintained. Instinct screamed at me to choose the left, to take the risk, but as I glanced at the truck in the mirror, I felt that low, creeping terror return. If I didn't choose wisely, I could find myself trapped. I steered left, feeling a surge of adrenaline as I veered sharply off the main road. The tires crunched over gravel and dirt. I glanced back, and for a moment, the headlights of the truck flickered, seeming to hesitate before following into the shadows behind me. I pressed on, my breath quickening, praying that this detour would lead me to safety. With every second that passed, the fear morphed into a palpable entity that wrapped itself around me, squeezing tightly, suffocating my resolve. I had to escape. I had to survive. But as I navigated the rough terrain, I realized that, in my attempt to find solace, I may have just driven deeper into the abyss. And the thought of never making it home clawed at my mind, threatening to consume me whole. Story 3, Whispers in the Dark. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, a tired buzz that filled the silence of the warehouse. I always hated the night shift, the hours stretching out like shadows across the vast, empty space. The building had a skeletal quality, steel beams and concrete walls standing guard over forgotten machinery and crumbling crates. It felt like a tomb, and I was its solitary watcher, tasked with fending off any intruders that dared to breach its desolation. I settled into the fold-out chair at the security desk, a thermos of coffee at my side, the dark liquid sloshing around like my racing thoughts. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me. I pulled it out, surprised to see an unknown number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, but curiosity gnawed at me and I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice breaking the stillness. Only silence met my ears for a moment, then the faintest whisper, a breath that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Hello?" I repeated, hoping for a response, but the line went dead. I stared at the screen, feeling a chill creep up my spine. Perhaps it was a wrong number, I reasoned, dismissing the unease gnawing at my gut. I set the phone down, trying to shake off the feeling. My usual routine kicked in, I checked the security monitors, the screens illuminating the darkened corners of the warehouse. Everything seemed still, just the rustle of air creeping through the cracks. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that the night shift played tricks on the mind. An hour passed, and the phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't hesitate. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep a steady tone. The whispers were back, nearer this time, indistinct yet unnervingly close. I felt my heart race, a primal instinct urging me to stand and check the perimeter. With a deep breath, I hung up, the phone slipping from my fingers and landing with a dull thud on the desk. I didn't want to feel afraid, but the reality set in. I was all alone in a building that echoed with secrets. I rose from my chair and began my rounds, the sound of my footsteps muffled against the concrete floor. I moved through the labyrinth of the warehouse, each step measured and deliberate, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The air was thick, heavy with a smell I couldn't place, something metallic, like rust. A glance at the monitor confirmed my fears. The camera showed only emptiness. I cursed under my breath and decided to head to the loading docks, where the shadows gathered thickest. As I approached, I heard it again, a muffled voice, like someone was stifling their words. My heart raced, and I pressed my back against the wall, peering around the corner. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding foreign even to me. The whispers ceased, plunging me into an eerie silence. I strained my ears but heard only my own breathing, quick and shallow. Maybe it was just the wind, I told myself, the old building settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I turned back toward the security desk, determined to shake off this creeping dread. But as I retraced my steps, my phone rang again, cutting through the quiet like a knife. I knew it was the same unknown number. The temptation was unbearable. I answered, throat tight with apprehension. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This time, I heard it clearly, a voice, low and urgent, just out of reach of comprehension. I felt sweat bead along my brow as I squeezed the phone tighter. The sound of rustling fabric echoed in the background, like someone was moving, lurking just beyond my sight. "What do you want?" I shouted into the phone, desperate for an answer. The voice halted, and for a moment, I thought I heard a laugh, soft and sinister. Just as quickly, the line went dead again. I slammed the phone down, heart pounding, and stood frozen for a moment, processing what had just happened. I needed to call my supervisor, to tell someone I felt threatened, but my instincts warned me against it. I didn't want to admit that I was afraid. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and headed back into the dark recesses of the warehouse, determined to confront whatever it was that had taken residence in my mind. The further I wandered, the more I felt like an intruder in my own skin. I flashed the beam of light into the shadows, creating a dance of darkness against the walls. Each corner I turned was met with silence. Each space I illuminated bore the mark of a long-forgotten past, but that didn't quell the feeling of being watched. Then, I heard it again, a whisper, clearer now, and I froze. It was coming from the far end of the storage area, a place I had always thought of as just another empty corner. I steadied my breath, willed myself to move. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice echoing back at me. The whisper stopped suddenly, and an unsettling stillness enveloped me. I waited, the only sound my heart drumming in my ears. And just as I was about to turn back, I caught a flicker of movement in the shadows. My body tensed as a figure emerged, silhouetted against the darkness, unyielding and still. I turned to run, adrenaline surging through me, but the grounding feeling of fear gripped my feet to the floor. I was now alone, and the night had only just begun to reveal its true horrors. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting uneven shadows against the concrete walls of the deserted warehouse. Despite the hum of the overhead fixtures, an oppressive silence enveloped the space, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. I checked my watch, 2:13 a.m. My shift had only just begun, but it already felt like I'd been here for hours. The clanging of metal echoed through the stillness as I moved from my post by the entrance to the security office in the far corner. It was a small room that smelled faintly of old coffee and stale air, dominated by a bank of monitors displaying various camera feeds. The dim glow illuminated the dust motes swirling in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even by the inanimate screens. I took a deep breath, hoping to calm the unease that had settled in my stomach since I first stepped inside the warehouse. I grabbed my phone, a lifeline against the solitude, and scrolled through my contacts. A handful of friends and family stared back at me, their faces a reminder of warmth and laughter outside these walls. I thought of calling my friend, Jake, but instead, I settled for scrolling through social media, letting the mindless drivel distract me from the creeping feeling of anxiety. Just then, my phone buzzed violently against the desk, shattering the quiet. I glanced down, seeing an unknown number flashing across the screen. I hesitated, my heart pounding. It was common for businesses like this to receive prank calls, but this felt different. It felt personal. After a moment's pause, curiosity got the better of me. I answered. "Hello?" Silence greeted me on the other end, thick and suffocating. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a low, muffled whisper, almost unintelligible. My heart raced as I strained to make out words. "Are you alone?" The voice was barely audible, like a rusted wool turning in the distance. "Who is this?" I managed to say, keeping my voice steadier than I felt. But the call ended abruptly, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own breath and the gnawing thought that someone, somehow, knew where I was. I hung up, the phone shaking in my hand. I pushed the thought aside. Surely, it was a prank, just the remnants of a long, lonely night. I returned my attention to the monitors, flicking through the feeds of the empty warehouse, but my mind remained on the call. I shook my head, trying to dispel the paranoia that was creeping in. After a few minutes, the stillness of the warehouse began to gnaw at me again. I stood up, pacing the small office, trying to shake the feeling that I was, in fact, not alone. I took another glance at the monitors. Everything looked normal. The shadows danced in the corners, yet nothing seemed out of place. Then, the phone rang again, echoing through the office. I jumped, a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins as I glanced at the screen. The same unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" This time, there was no whisper. Just static at the other end. I could feel my pulse quickening as I heard movement, barely perceptible footsteps, as if someone was circling the outside of my office. Panic lodged in my throat. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, but I thought I heard the faintest echo of my own voice right after I had spoken. It was unsettling, as if someone was mimicking me. I dropped the phone and rushed to peer out the small window of the office. The view was limited, just a long, empty corridor lined with crates and cobwebs. But it was void of movement, and I felt a brief relief wash over me. Yet, as I turned back to my desk, the sudden sound of something scraping against metal sent chills down my spine. I stilled, listening intently. The noise came again, closer this time, echoing from the direction of the warehouse floor. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. My heart thundered in my chest as I stepped cautiously out of the office, shining the light down the corridor. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice firmer than I felt. The only answer was the continued scratching, a sickening sound that seemed to bounce off the walls. I forced myself to move deeper into the warehouse, the beam illuminating dusty crates and forgotten machinery. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow flitting between two rows of stacked boxes. It vanished before I could comprehend it, but the feeling of being watched crashed over me like a wave. I could feel my breath quickening, my instinct screaming at me to retreat. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to project confidence I didn't possess. "Show yourself." Silence rang back, but the scratching grew louder, more frantic. It was accompanied now by faint whispers, indistinct words that sent a shiver coursing down my spine. I turned the flashlight in the direction of the sounds, but whatever was making them remained just out of sight, lurking in the darkness. I backed away slowly, knowing I needed to get to the office, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. Just as I turned to flee, the door to the office slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the warehouse and jolting me into action. With no time left to think, I sprinted down the corridor, heart pounding and breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was right behind me. I reached for the door, praying it wasn't locked, but as I turned the knob, the metal felt cold and unyielding. Panic surged as I pounded on the door. "Let me in. Let me in." I shouted, my voice cracking. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me. I felt their presence closing in, and the last vestiges of my courage crumbled. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. The silence of the warehouse wrapped around me like a heavy fog, each shuffle of my feet echoing against the cold concrete walls. I had always thought the night shift would be lonely but bearable. Now, with every tick of the clock, the weight of solitude pressed down harder. My watch had long since passed midnight, and I was losing track of time, lost in the monotony that came with monitoring the dim, cavernous space. The phone call had come just as I was settling into my second round. I had been scanning the screens, scanning the shadows, when my personal cell buzzed. I had expected it to be a prank, just another way to pass the time. But when I answered, a chill traced my spine. There was only silence on the other end, punctuated by muffled whispers that faded into the static. I had hung up, but my heart raced as I stared at the phone, hoping it was just an error or a wrong number. But the calls kept coming. Each time the phone rang, I felt the urge to ignore it, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it someone from the company playing a sick joke? I shook my head at the idea. I had worked here long enough to know they wouldn't waste their time. On my third round, the lights flickered, casting a strobing pattern across the floor. The air chilled abruptly, and I realized I wasn't just dealing with the warehouse's eerie atmosphere. Someone was here. I could feel it. I paused, straining to hear, the whispers now a constant presence in my mind. I moved toward the rear of the building, the farthest point from my post, my breath shallow. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the loading dock, barely audible beneath the hum of the overhead lights. I crept towards the sound, my heart pounding in rhythm with each cautious step. The loading dock doors had been sealed tight for weeks, so the idea of someone being inside sent a thrill of panic coursing through me. I reached for my flashlight, flicking it on and directing the beam toward the dock. Nothing. Just shadows. But the whispers, they grew louder and clearer, as if they beckoned me from the darkness. I stood frozen, my skin prickling with unease. They were no longer muffled, they were distinct, a blend of urgent tones, like a conversation that had grown heated. I ducked behind a crate, the rough wood pressing painfully into my back. I had to know what was happening, but I didn't want to give away my position. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling and swallowed by the emptiness. Silence answered me, but the whispers intensified, a chaotic rush of voices dancing just out of earshot. I felt like I was on the edge of a precipice, teetering between fear and curiosity. Raw instinct urged me to retreat, but the part of me that had signed up for the job, the part that needed this paycheck, pushed me forward. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and despair. I crept toward the source of the sound, my pulse quickening with each step. The loading dock was dark, the shadows pooling like spilled ink. I spotted a flicker of movement at the far end, just beyond the beams of my flashlight. A figure, slight and hunched. "Hey!" I shouted again, louder this time, desperate to pierce the veil of fear that wrapped around me. The figure froze, and for an instant, I thought I might have scared them off. But then they turned slowly, their face hidden in the gloom. "Help us," the voice pierced through the silence, raw and pleading. "Who are you?" I shouted again, my grip tightening on the flashlight. I stepped closer. "What do you want?" The figure stepped back into the shadows, whispering something incoherent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, a primal instinct screaming at me to leave, to run. But I couldn't, my legs wouldn't obey. I was trapped in place, both terrified and transfixed by the mystery before me. "Can you see us?" came another voice, clearer this time, tinged with an unsettling mix of hope and despair. My eyes darted around the loading dock, trying to pick out more shapes in the darkness. "What do you mean? Who are you?" "We didn't mean to intrude," the first figure said, stepping forward just enough for the light to catch a glimpse of their face, a gaunt, hollow expression, eyes wide with fear. We're hiding from him." "From who?" I asked, the question leaving my mouth before I could stop it. "He knows," they whispered, glancing nervously over their shoulder, as if the very mention of him might summon a phantom from the shadows. My heart raced, a feral beat against my rib cage. There was no one else here, was there? "What are you talking about?" "Just go," the second figure insisted, voice trembling. "Leave before he finds you too." The air grew heavy as the weight of their words settled over me. Something sinister lurked in the corners of the warehouse, something that had turned the mundane task of nighttime security into a threat. I could feel it creeping into my veins, an icy tendril of dread twisting around my heart. "Who is he?" I pressed, desperate for answers, but the figures only exchanged panicked glances. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from deeper within the warehouse, a cacophony of metal that reverberated through the stillness. The figures recoiled, and I instinctively took a step back, the flashlight's beam wavering. My mind screamed for me to flee, to abandon this place and the lurking shadows, but it would mean leaving them behind. "Go," they urged again, voices rising in panic. "You have to go now." I turned to run, my instincts finally overriding the part of me that wanted to help. As I sprinted down the aisle, the whispers followed, a chilling reminder of what I was leaving behind. But I knew one thing for certain: whatever haunted this warehouse was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The night was still far from over. As the unyielding hum of the fluorescent lights flickered above, I settled into my cramped security office for another night, the silence wrapping around me like a thick fog. The warehouse loomed ominously outside the window, its shadows stretching across the concrete floor. My shift started hours ago, yet it felt like time had come to a standstill. I was painfully aware of the isolation. There was no one else here, just me, the endless aisles of forgotten inventory, and the creeping dread that had begun to gnaw at my insides. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang, the shrill sound slicing through the stillness like a knife. I jolted, my heart racing. Who could be calling at this hour? Tentatively, I picked up the receiver, my hand trembling. "Hello?" I said, my voice echoing back at me, laden with disbelief. Silence hung in the air, thick and oppressive, before a faint murmur spilled through the line. It was indistinct, nothing more than a whispering wind. I squeezed the receiver tighter, straining to catch something, anything, but the moment passed as quickly as it had come. The line went dead, leaving behind an eerie quiet. I hung up, my skin prickling with unease. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to the oddities of night shifts. I had faced rowdy drunks, skirmishes between rival gangs, and the occasional stray raccoon rummaging through the dumpster. But this was different. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I stared at the phone, a gnawing sensation in my gut telling me I wasn't alone. I forced myself to exhale, pushing aside the encroaching panic. Perhaps it was just a wrong number, or maybe someone was playing a prank. I attempted to shake it off, but the whispers lingered in my mind like a haunting refrain. I leaned back in the chair, trying to focus on the monitor displaying the security cameras. The grainy feed flickered, revealing the cavernous spaces of the warehouse. A few boxes here, a stack of wooden pallets there, nothing out of the ordinary. Minutes turned into an hour, each second stretching longer than the last. I was just about to pour myself another cup of coffee when the phone rang again. My heart sank. This time, I answered more cautiously. "Hello?" Again, the silence was deafening before the whispers returned, muffled yet disconcerting. Panic surged within me, and I slammed the receiver down, a crack echoing in the stillness. Someone was in the building. The realization hit me like a cold wave, washing over me with dread. I glanced at the camera feeds, my pulse quickening as I scanned the dark corners of the warehouse. It was all too easy for someone to slip between the shadows, to hide where my watchful eyes couldn't reach. I grabbed the flashlight, the cool metal grounding me for an instant. I stepped out of the office, each creak of the floor beneath my feet amplifying the eerie quiet. The heavy door to the warehouse groaned as I pushed it open, revealing the vast, empty space. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and every instinct screamed for me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to know if someone was really there. I moved through the aisles, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the warehouse itself was holding its breath. I listened intently, straining to catch any sound that might betray a lurking presence. The whispers returned, now clearer, more insistent, threading through the silence like a chilling melody. I froze, heart pounding, my mind racing as I realized the whispers were coming from deeper within the warehouse. "Get out," they seemed to plead, a chorus of voices layered with urgency. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear wrapping around me like a vice. I had to investigate. Surely, it was just the wind, perhaps even a trick of my own imagination. The isolation had played games with my mind before, twisting reality into nightmares. With each step I took, the atmosphere shifted. I edged closer to the source of the sound, and the whispers grew louder, clearer. An overwhelming sense of dread clawed at my throat, urging me to turn back. But curiosity propelled me forward. I felt like a moth drawn to the flame, even as the rational part of me shouted to flee. Then, like a switch flipping, the whispers ceased. I stood alone in the aisle, sweat trickling down my spine, the flashlight beam trembling in my grip. I turned slowly, scanning the space around me. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. I took a breath, trying to steady myself, and that's when I heard it, a soft thud, a disturbance in the air, emanating from the far end of the warehouse. I moved towards the sound, each step deliberate. The darkness enveloped me, suffocating and thick, and the flashlight flickered as if sensing my dread. Just as I reached the corner of the aisle, my heart dropped. A figure stood at the end, backlit by a stray moonbeam pouring through a cracked window. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face shrouded in shadow, but the glint of eyes caught the light, glimmering with something I couldn't decipher. "Get out," the voice echoed, sending chills coursing through my veins. In that instant, every instinct screamed to run. I turned, feet pounding against the concrete, panic propelling me back towards the office. I could feel the presence behind me, a palpable weight pressing down, urging me to hurry. The whispers returned, louder now, drowning out my thoughts. "Get out. "Get out." They repeated, a cacophony that rattled in my skull. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. I pressed my back against it, breathless, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I was not alone. I never had been, and whatever was in the warehouse was far more sinister than mere prank calls. I glanced at the cameras, desperate to see if the figure had followed me. My blood ran cold as I realized the screens were showing static, black and white fuzz filling the monitors. I was plunged into darkness, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. I had resigned myself to the clinging shadows and unfamiliar creaks of the warehouse by the time my shift rolled into its 4th hour. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently overhead, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the grimy concrete floor. I had set up a chair near the main entrance, my gaze flitting between the vast emptiness of the aisles and the clock mounted on the far wall. Midnight ticked over like a metronome, each second echoing louder in the stillness, and it felt as if the warehouse itself was holding its breath. After that unsettling call from the unknown number, I had convinced myself it was nothing more than a prank. The voice on the other end had been muffled, distorted. I hadn't bothered to return the call, thinking that perhaps lingering anxiety from my first week alone in this desolate place was playing tricks on my mind. The echoing sounds of the phone ringing in the empty office still haunted my ears, a piercing reminder of the isolation I had chosen. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts, hesitant fingers hovering over the screen. My sister had called earlier, worried, but I brushed her off like I had done with everyone else. "I'm fine," I murmured to my reflection in the darkened glass, though I felt anything but. Another half an hour passed before the phone rang again. This time, I jumped in my seat, the sudden sound slicing through the silence like a knife. I glanced at the screen, the same unknown number flashing ominously. I hesitated for far too long before answering, the weight of the call pressing down on my chest. "Hello?" I said, my voice wavering, as if it might break under the tension. Silence. Just breath, low and raspy. I waited, my heart racing in sync with the pulse of the fluorescent light overhead. I cleared my throat, half expecting the call to drop, but the breathing continued. It felt like something malevolent was lurking just beyond my reach. "Who is this?" I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Show yourself." A rustle echoed through the phone, and then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, heart hammering against my ribs as the words "call ended" flashed ominously back at me. I threw my phone onto the chair, a feeling of dread washing over me. What if it wasn't someone playing a prank? The thought clung to the back of my mind like a shadow, refusing to let go. I rose from my seat, feeling the heavy weight of the night pressing down on me, and started to patrol the aisles. The sound of my footsteps reverberated through the cavernous space, creating a rhythmic heartbeat against the cold starkness. I tried to focus on each sound, the distant rustle of cardboard, the sporadic drip of water from a leaky pipe, but every tiny noise seemed amplified, as if the warehouse itself was alive and watching. Halfway down one aisle, I paused, the air growing heavy with an unsettling chill. I turned around, scanning the shadows that cradled every corner, and it hit me, a new sound was there, a whispering that sent shivers skittering down my spine. It was faint but distinct, like a distant conversation carried on a breeze I couldn't quite catch. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing back, empty and void. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, like a cacophony of secret conversations just beyond my comprehension. I forced myself to take a step forward, driven by an urge to uncover the source. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving only the pounding of my heart and the sound of my own breath. I stepped deeper into the shadows, the dim light barely illuminating the stacks of boxes looming around me. Each one felt like a dark sentinel, guarding secrets I yearned to unearth yet dreaded to confront. As I turned a corner, my foot caught on a piece of fallen debris, sending me stumbling forward. My hand shot out, grasping for balance. I steadied myself and glanced around, but nothing stirred. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was just my imagination, I told myself. Just the isolation playing tricks on me. But the whispering resumed, now closer, clearer. I took another step, and then another, until I was almost running, drawn inexplicably toward the far end of the warehouse. Light spilled from a small window, the only promise of safety in the oppressive dark. The whispers grew louder still, a jumble of urgent voices that coiled around me like tendrils. I reached the end of the aisle, heart pounding, only to be met by silence. The area was abandoned, and the light from the window illuminated dust motes swirling in the air. There was nowhere to hide, no one to be seen. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but before I could move, I heard a distinct sound, a soft, hesitant footfall directly behind me. I froze. There was someone else here. I whirled around, adrenaline surging through my veins, ready to confront whatever nightmare lurked in the shadows. I strained my ears, hoping to catch another sound, but the whispers had faded back into silence, leaving only a suffocating stillness in their wake. "Who's there?" I shouted, the words echoing back at me hollowly. No reply. The emptiness stretched around me, thick and suffocating, and I took a step backward instinctively, my heart racing faster than I thought possible. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I was now alone. The dim light flickered again above me, and when I glanced up, the illumination revealed something that shouldn't have been there, a figure, just a shadow at first, but then it shifted, solidifying into a vague form crouched just outside the light. I stumbled back, the weight of dread pressing down against my chest. "Get away from me!" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure remained still, shrouded in darkness, and a chill swept through the air. My instinct screamed at me to run, to escape this place that had suddenly transformed into a den of horrors. But my feet were planted firmly, paralyzed by a fear that was all-consuming. "Please," I whispered, the plea escaping my lips as I turned to flee, the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the hollow halls. The whispers returned, a haunting chorus trailing behind me as I raced toward the exit, desperate and terrified. Story 4, Whispers in the Woods. The sun had dipped beneath the horizon, and the last rays of light had surrendered to the encroaching darkness. I sat around my campfire, the warm glow casting flickering shadows against the towering pines that surrounded me. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of damp leaves and the lingering aroma of burning wood. I had always found solace in the solitude of nature, a sanctuary away from the chaos of city life. But that evening, an uneasy sensation stirred within me, something I could not shake off. I poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers dance into the night sky. My tent stood a few yards away, illuminated by the fire's orange hue. It was a simple setup, just me and my sturdy little backpack, but it felt like I was the last person on Earth. I had chosen this secluded spot intentionally, miles away from the nearest trailhead, seeking both adventure and peace of mind. Yet, as the night deepened, the tranquil surroundings began to shift. The typical sounds of the forest, leaves rustling, branches cracking, grew distant and faded into a low hum of silence. I could hear my heartbeat beneath the sounds of the crackling fire, a rhythmic pulse that danced in time with an inexplicable fear brewing within me. I glanced around, half expecting to see a deer or some other woodland creature emerge from the shadows, but the trees stood still, their dark silhouettes silent witnesses to my growing discomfort. It wasn't long before I heard it, the soft, almost inaudible whisper of movement. My pulse quickened, and I strained to listen, trying to discern whether it was the wind or something more tangible hiding just out of sight. The noise seemed to come from the edge of the forest, beyond the reach of my campfire's light. I took a deep breath, willing myself to dismiss it as nothing more than an overactive imagination. I turned my attention back to the fire, throwing another log onto the flames, but the sensation of being watched lingered like a shadow on my shoulders. The flickering light played tricks with my eyes, and I couldn't help but imagine dark figures lurking just beyond the perimeter of the light. I forced a chuckle from my lips, shaking my head at the absurdity of my fear. The night stretched on, and eventually, I decided to retire to my tent. As I crawled inside, I unzipped my sleeping bag and nestled into the folds, wrapping myself in its warmth. The fire outside continued to crackle, but I could feel the chill of the night creeping in through the thin fabric of the tent. My eyes fluttered closed, the fatigue of the day catching up with me, but sleep danced just out of reach. Then, from deep within the trees, came the sound again, a soft crunching, like footsteps padding through the underbrush. My heart raced as I lay frozen, listening intently, gauging the distance and direction of the noise. Had I imagined it? The crickets chirped a frantic rhythm, and I felt my pulse synchronizing with their song. Finally, with a shaky breath, I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek outside. The fire flickered weakly, and the darkness beyond felt alive, almost sentient. I scanned the tree line, but nothing stirred, only shadows moving in ways that made my skin prickle. The next morning came with the promise of dawn, the sun breaking free from the horizon as if to wash away my unease. I forced myself to forget about the noises from the night before, attributing them to the wilderness and my own overactive imagination. After breakfast, I decided to explore nearby trails, hoping to lose myself in the beauty of nature. As I wandered through the trees, however, I noticed something odd, a series of markings etched into a nearby tree. They were crude, almost like symbols I could not comprehend, their dark lines standing out against the pale bark. I stepped closer, tracing my fingers along the rough surface. Whoever had made them had carved them deeply, as if they held meaning. A shiver traced my spine as I wondered who would mark such a remote forest. With a sense of foreboding settling in my chest, I turned back toward the campsite, feeling the weight of those strange symbols pressing on my mind. The day passed slowly, the sunlight filtering through the branches above, but the air felt thick with tension, and the woods seemed to pulse with a strange, eerie energy. As night descended again, I sat by the campfire, the flames dancing and crackling, but the earlier comfort was gone. I glanced at the tree where I had found the markings, feeling the eyes of the forest upon me. Each rustle of leaves and snap of branches sent my heart into a frenzy. The world around me was both beautiful and terrifying, a juxtaposition I had never quite understood until that night. When the sounds returned, those soft, deliberate movements creeping closer, I was no longer inclined to dismiss them. They were real, and the realization struck with the force of a cold wave. I could feel the presence in the woods, the sensation of being hunted, of being the uninvited guest in a territory that was not my own. My survival instincts kicked in. I bolted into the tent, fumbling in the darkness to find my flashlight. The beam flickered to life, illuminating the thin fabric of my surroundings. I sat there, heart racing, listening to the sounds outside, different now, more deliberate. They were no longer just whispers of nature, but something darker, something primal. With the flashlight gripped tightly in my trembling hands, I peered out into the inky blackness beyond. My breath quickened as a figure, shadowy and indistinct, flickered at the edges of the light, a haunting silhouette that sent a new wave of fear crashing through me. I was now alone. The sun sank behind the trees, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. I sat by the campfire, its flickering light failing to fend off the creeping chill of the night. The warmth of the flames offered little comfort against the gnawing sense of unease that had settled in my stomach since I first heard those sounds, snapping twigs and distant rustlings that pierced the silence like a knife. Each noise sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to dismiss it as the sounds of wildlife that filled the wilderness, and all hooting, the soft scamper of a raccoon. Earlier that day, I had followed the winding trails that led deeper into the forest. The trees stood like sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to ensnare any who dared venture too far. By the time I returned to the campsite, I was grateful for the familiar side of my tent, its fabric taut against the evening breeze. After setting up my fire, I had roasted marshmallows and recalled childhood memories of camping trips with my family. But as darkness fell, those memories turned into shadows that danced in the firelight. The last embers of daylight faded quickly, shrouding the surrounding trees in an oppressive blackness. It felt as though the forest was alive, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I huddled closer to the fire, its warmth unable to penetrate the chill that seemed to emanate from the depths of the woods. And then I heard it again. A crunching sound, like footsteps on dried leaves, echoed through the darkness. I straightened, listening intently. My heart raced as I glanced around the campsite, half expecting to see someone lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. Just an animal, I muttered to myself, trying to soothe the rising panic. I reminded myself that the sounds were likely from deer or something harmless, but the primal part of my brain screamed that I was now alone. I picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling into the night. Just then, a low growl reverberated through the air, unmistakably human in its tone. My breath stilled. I couldn't move, suspended in a moment of fear as my gaze swept the edge of the woods. The trees loomed larger, their dark forms consuming the small area illuminated by the fire. I wanted to call out, to make my presence known, but the words caught in my throat like a lump of ice. Finally, I bolted to my feet, the stick clattering from my grasp. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there?" My voice cracked, betraying the calm facade I attempted to project. Silence enveloped my words, swallowing them whole. I forced myself to take a step forward, but the ground beneath my feet was unsteady, like stepping onto a ship's deck in a storm. I peered into the shadows, urging my eyes to pierce the darkness. Another noise, a twig snapping closer this time. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had to know what was out there. Despite every survival instinct screaming at me to retreat, I grabbed my flashlight from the tent and switched it on. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating the surrounding trees in stark outlines. I took a cautious step beyond the campfire's light, moving toward the direction of the sound. My heart raced as I approached the tree line, the flashlight flickering unsteadily in my trembling hand. The air felt thick, oppressive, and I fought against the instinct to turn back. The forest whispered secrets that felt dangerously close. I could almost hear the rustling of unseen eyes watching me. I shone the light around, scanning for movement, but the darkness swallowed everything in its depths. As I turned to angle the beam toward a nearby tree, I froze. Symbols were carved into the bark, jagged lines and shapes that twisted into grotesque patterns. They sent a chill coursing through me. The markings seemed old, weathered, yet somehow fresh, as if someone had taken a knife to the tree just before I arrived. I took a step closer, the light illuminating them further, and my breath hitched when I recognized a crude figure, a humanoid silhouette framed by spirals and odd geometric shapes. Panic surged within me as I stepped back, and that's when I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of movement, but this time it was accompanied by a soft, almost melodic whisper that danced through the trees, disembodied yet tantalizingly close. "Come here," it beckoned, a voice that should have been comforting but instead sent me spiraling into terror. I turned on my heel, adrenaline surging through my veins as I sprinted back to the safety of the campsite. My mind raced with the implications. What kind of a person would come this far into the woods? The thought of being stalked by something or someone chased my sanity down a darkened path. I threw myself into the tent, zipping it shut with a frantic tug. The fabric felt thin and flimsy, and I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears. With trembling fingers, I fumbled for my phone, but the battery was dead, leaving me in an impenetrable silence. The only source of light was the campfire, flickering weakly in the distance like a dying star. I pressed my back against the tent wall, straining my ears for any sign of movement. The whispers continued, drifting through the night air, taunting me. I realized then that the forest was no longer just a backdrop. It had become a living entity, hungry and aware. I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, the realization settling like lead in my gut. All at once, a branch snapped right outside my tent, close enough to make me jump. I held my breath, every instinct screaming at me to remain still. I was being watched, and whatever it was patient. My thoughts raced, and I knew I had to figure out a way out of this nightmare. With the fire drawing to embers and no help in sight, I was left with one option. I had to survive until dawn. The morning sun poured into my tent, bright and unwelcome. I hadn't slept well, the shrieks from the night before seeping into my dreams, twisting their way into vivid imaginings of unseen eyes watching my every move. I blinked against the brightness, pushing aside the recollections that haunted me. With effort, I crawled out of the warmth of my sleeping bag, wincing as the cool air nipped at my skin. I had to shake off the feeling of being watched. It was just the nervousness of camping alone. I tried to convince myself that the sounds I heard were merely the calls of wildlife. Frustrated, I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp forest air, rich with the scent of pine and damp earth. I wandered to the nearby stream, its water sparkling as it danced over stones, and I splashed some on my face, hoping to clear away the remnants of unease. After drinking a cup of instant coffee, I steeled myself to explore the area around my campsite. I knew I needed to find out what had left those markings. My heart raced as I retraced my steps from the previous evening, heading deeper into the woods. The trees loomed above me like silent sentinels, shadows creeping in as the sun shifted behind them. As I walked, I kept my eyes peeled for anything unusual. I had spotted that strange, carved pattern on the tree last night. I hoped I wouldn't find more. The forest was eerily silent, every crunch of twigs beneath my boots echoing as if it were amplified in the stillness. I could only hear my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears as the reality of my isolation bore down on me like a heavy fog. A sudden rustle came from the underbrush to my right, and I froze. I had expected to see a deer or perhaps a rabbit, but instead, there was nothing, only an unsettling emptiness. I resumed my pace, unease creeping back in with each step. Then I stumbled upon it. A clearing, small but unsettling. The grass there was flattened, arranged in a circular pattern that looked eerily intentional. I knelt down, brushing my fingers over the blades, their edges still damp with morning dew. My fingers glided over something solid, and I jerked back, my heart racing. A small, triangular stone, almost like a shard, rested in the center. I picked it up, examining it closely. The stone was smooth, almost polished, with strange engravings etched into its surface, symbols I had never seen before. They pulsed with a darkness that sent a chill down my spine. Instinctively, I dropped it as if it had burned my hand, glancing around the clearing, afraid to move. I turned back toward the trees, wanting to escape the unsettling space, when I heard it again, a sound different from before. This time, it was faint but distinct, a low whisper carried on the breeze. I strained to listen, trying to discern the words, but my heart hammered too loudly. The whispering seemed to rise and fall, like a chant from somewhere deep within the woods. Fingers trembling, I reached for my phone, grasping it like a lifeline. No signal. I cursed under my breath, feeling a growing sense of isolation. I had heard stories about people getting lost in these woods, about how they just vanished without a trace. Was I becoming one of them? Feeling my throat tighten, I fled the clearing, moving quickly back to my campsite, convinced I needed to pack up and leave. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky when I reached my tent, and the shadows lengthened ominously behind me. I had barely set my gear down when I noticed the marks scratched into the dirt near the entrance of my tent. Panic surged through me, and I knelt down, inspecting the ground. They were shallow but jagged, resembling claws dragged across the earth. My breath quickened as I fought the urge to scream. I stood, glancing around my campsite, half expecting someone to step out from behind the trees, but I was alone, at least, I thought I was. The night would come soon, and I felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of crimson, and the forest transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. I lit my campfire, its flickering light offering a modicum of comfort, but I knew it wouldn't last. I spent too long staring into the flames, lost in thoughts of escape, the warmth fighting against the growing chill of the forest. The whispers returned, softer now, swirling through the trees. They wound around me like clinging vines, tightening, and I knew without a doubt that something was out there. Something that didn't belong. I clutched my knife, a flimsy protection against an unknown terror, and stared into the darkness surrounding my campsite. It was only a matter of time before night fully descended. A time when shadows came to life, when whispers turned into screams. I heard footsteps, light and deliberate, just beyond the edge of the firelight. I held my breath, my heart racing, the world narrowing down to the sound that sent shivers through my spine. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, frozen in a primal instinct to survive. The whispers turned louder, a cacophony of voices calling out, a desperate urgency fueling their tones. I was not alone. I was being watched. And whoever or whatever was watching had no intention of letting me leave. As the sun dipped below the thick canopy of trees, casting long, twisted shadows over the forest floor, I felt an unsettling chill creep into my bones. It had been 3 days since I first heard the strange noises at night, and the eerie silence that followed them was almost worse than the sounds themselves. Each crack of a branch or rustle of leaves had me retreating deeper into my sleeping bag, my heart pounding and my mind racing with images of creatures lurking just beyond my flickering campfire light. The odd markings near my campsite had only intensified my unease. They were scratched into the bark of a nearby tree, jagged and unnatural, resembling something between a warning and an invitation. I had spent hours trying to convince myself they were the work of a bored local, some misguided soul looking to entertain themselves with mischief. But deep down, I felt the weight of something more sinister pressing against me. That evening, I sat by the fire, its warmth flickering against the encroaching darkness. The crackling logs were a poor defense against the feeling of being watched. I tried to push my fears aside, focusing instead on the beauty of the wilderness surrounding me, the stars pricking the vast sky, the gentle whispers of the wind through the pines. But the serene atmosphere was a fragile veneer, barely concealing the dread coiling in my gut. As the flames danced, I decided to cook up the last of my supplies, a simple freeze-dried meal I had meticulously planned for this trip. I stirred the contents in a lightweight pot, all the while glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something emerging from the woods. The more I listened to the forest, the more alive it seemed, each sound amplified in the quiet night. I imagined eyes peering through the underbrush, watching my every move. With dinner finished, I settled back against a fallen log, staring into the fire. It offered some comfort, a small bubble of warmth against the oppressive darkness. I thought about the hike I would take tomorrow, a trail that promised breathtaking views if I could just make it through the night. The idea of packing up my belongings and leaving this place felt increasingly appealing, yet something kept me anchored to my spot, perhaps a stubborn refusal to let fear dictate my actions. Just as I began to relax, a piercing sound sliced through my thoughts, shattering the fragile calm. It was a high-pitched wail, echoing through the trees, followed by a series of guttural growls. My heart raced as I shot upright, straining my ears to decipher the location of the noise. It sounded closer than anything else I had heard before. Panic swelled in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam flickering into the darkness, illuminating the trunks of trees and the blanket of pine needles beneath my feet. I forced myself to breathe steadily, to be rational. It could be an animal, perhaps a coyote, but the chilling feeling in my gut insisted otherwise. As I stood at the edge of my camp, more markings caught my eye, deeper and more chaotic than the ones I'd seen before. My pulse quickened. They weren't just scratches anymore. They were symbols, crude shapes that seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't quite understand. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my ears, but an inexplicable urge compelled me to step closer. The air turned thick as I knelt down to inspect them. My fingers brushed against the rough bark, tracing the odd patterns. My mind raced with thoughts of tribal markings or some lost language, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something from the past was clawing its way into my reality. I was not alone here, and whatever had left these signs was watching me. I heard it again, the wail, louder now, followed by the unmistakable snap of a twig somewhere beyond the tree line. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I whipped around, shining my flashlight into the blackness, expecting to see eyes glinting back at me. But there was nothing, only shadows dancing in the beam. The next sound sent chills coursing through me, laughter, low and mocking, echoing through the trees. It wasn't the laugh of a friendly camper or even the wild calls of animals. It was something darker. I stumbled back, heart racing, the flashlight shaking in my grip. I turned to my tent, a flimsy barrier between me and whatever was out there. The markings, the noises, the laughter, it all began to spiral into a panic that threatened to swallow me whole. I needed to get inside, to lock myself away from whatever prowled in the dark. As I darted toward the tent, I felt an icy breath against my neck, and terror gripped me with icy fingers. I turned sharply, but the beam of light caught only swirling shadows. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of me, the temperature dropping, and suddenly I could hear the rustling of leaves, like footsteps closing in. I reached the tent, fumbling with the zipper like a child caught doing something forbidden. With a final frantic tug, it opened, and I threw myself inside, scrambling to secure the flap. The darkness enveloped me, the sound of the forest now a cacophony of dread. I sat on the floor, back pressed against the cold fabric, every creak and groan amplifying my fear. As I huddled in the suffocating darkness, I realized that I was no longer just camping in the wild. I was part of something much more ancient, a dance of predator and prey, where the hunter had become the hunted. The markings weren't just a sign, they were a warning. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe, but the laughter echoed in my mind, a sinister reminder that I was not alone, and dawn felt an eternity away. I lay awake, the thin walls of my tent feeling more like a coffin than a sanctuary. The forest was alive with sounds, each rustle and crack amplifying the dread that curled in my stomach. I had been foolish to dismiss those markings by the creek, chalking them up to the imagination running wild in isolation. But now, as the darkness thickened outside, a gnawing realization settled in my bones. Something wasn't right. The night stretched interminably, the shadows seeming to pulse and breathe around me. I turned to the pocket of my sleeping bag, where my flashlight lay. It felt like a lifeline, a flimsy barrier between the world I knew and the one that had begun to encroach upon me. The thought of stepping outside clawed at my insides. What if the source of those sounds, the thing that had made its presence known by those markings, was lurking just beyond the safety of my tent? With every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves, my mind spiraled. I had heard whispers of things that stalked the woods, feral men, deranged wanderers who had lost their way and adopted the forest as their home. I had dismissed them as myth, ghost stories meant to frighten campers into caution. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if that was exactly what loomed outside, hiding in the inky blackness. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. I had lost track of time, drifting between consciousness and a restless sleep marked by fragmented dreams of eyes watching me. Finally, I forced myself out of the cocoon of my sleeping bag, the chill of the night biting against my skin. I fumbled for my flashlight and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. I unzipped the tent slowly, the sound of the zipper piercing the night stillness like a scream. Once outside, the cool air hit me like a slap. The fire's embers were nearly out, but I could still see the outline of the campsite, a ghost of safety. I scanned the surroundings, my heart racing with every crackling leaf beneath my foot. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for me. I had to know if the markings were still there. The thought of them gnawed at my thoughts like a persistent itch. With each step toward the creek, I felt the weight of the forest pressing in, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When I reached the water's edge, I trained my flashlight on the ground, and there they were, strange, crude markings etched into the soil. They looked almost like runes, but I couldn't decipher their meaning. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone trying to communicate, or was it a warning? Suddenly, a noise shattered the silence, a sharp snap of a branch, close by. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned the beam of my flashlight toward the sound, but the darkness swallowed it. I felt exposed, utterly vulnerable, a lone figure in a world that felt increasingly hostile. Instinct kicked in. I knew I needed to head back to the tent, but the urge to investigate pulled at me like an unseen force. As I stood there, torn between fear and curiosity, I noticed more markings to my left. They were clustered together, more defined than the ones near the creek, almost as if they had been arranged deliberately. I stepped closer, my heart pounding louder than the rush of the water beside me. That's when I noticed it, the unmistakable outline of a boot print next to the markings. It was fresh, the edges still clear, and my breath hitched in my throat. I was not alone. Suddenly, all the stories I'd once dismissed of the campfire stalker came rushing back to me. My mind raced through the details, and I shuddered at the image of a face peering through the trees. I turned to run, but another noise froze me in place, a low, guttural sound echoing from the direction of my tent. It was a voice, though it was distorted, as if someone were mimicking the haunting calls of the forest. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Gathering every ounce of courage, I darted back toward the campsite, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly in front of me. I stumbled over roots, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I neared my tent, I caught a glimpse of movement in the trees, just a flash, a shadow slipping between the trunks. In a panic, I dove inside the tent, the zipper closing behind me like a prison door. I sat there, heart pounding, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, the beam shaking erratically as I tried to control my breathing. I listened intently, every sound amplified in the suffocating silence. Had I imagined it all? Or was there truly something out there, something that had been watching me? The guttural voice echoed again, closer this time, and I stifled a whimper, pressing my back against the pole of the tent. I could hear the heaviness of footsteps, slow and deliberate, passing near my campsite. My pulse quickened, and I fought the urge to call out, to reach for help that was miles away. A chill swept through the air, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as I realized I was being hunted. The darkness outside felt alive, wrapping around me like a predator coiling for the kill. And as the footsteps continued, I knew I had to survive the night somehow. Story 5, Signal from the Shadows. The day had been long, stretching into the evening like a weary stretch of road that never seemed to end. My head throbbed with the weight of deadlines and coffee, and as I trudged through the parking lot toward my car, I felt an inexplicable relief to be finally heading home. The sky was a bruised purple, hinting at the storms that might come, and I welcomed the idea of curling up on the couch with a book and a glass of whiskey. As I reached for my keys, I felt something odd in the pocket of my coat. It wasn't my phone. I had left that on my desk, chained to a charging cable. I pulled my hand out, revealing an unfamiliar device, a smartphone with a large, cracked screen, the glass glinting ominously in the dim light of the parking lot. I frowned, turning the phone over in my hands. It was a cheap model, the kind that had been popular a few years back, and I couldn't remember ever seeing it before. Maybe it belonged to a colleague who had accidentally dropped it in my pocket during the chaos of the office. I contemplated returning it tomorrow, but curiosity gnawed at me, and I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, displaying a wallpaper of some distant mountain range, serene and beautiful. I hesitated, but something inside urged me to take a look at the messages. There was a single notification blinking at the top of the home screen. I tapped it, revealing a message thread filled with conversations that were both alien and unsettling. "Where are you now?" the most recent message read, timestamped just a few hours earlier. I felt a chill creep down my spine as I scrolled through more messages. They weren't just conversations, they were surveillance logs of my day, a detailed account of my movements, my routine. Images were attached, one of me walking into a cafe, another of me leaving the office, the faint outline of the entrance captured behind me. There was even a picture of me at the grocery store, squinting at the labels on the shelf. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone tighter, the cracked screen spider-webbing into patterns that seemed almost alive. I wanted to dismiss it as a prank, something my coworkers had concocted to poke fun at my often mundane life, but deep down, I felt something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. A new message pinged, jolting me from my thoughts. It was from an unknown number. "I see you." The words rattled in my mind like a death knell. I glanced around the parking lot, but it was empty, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. I could feel the prickle of anxiety at the nape of my neck, as if someone were watching me, hidden just beyond my line of sight. I hesitated, considering my options. I could call the police, but what was I supposed to say? I found a phone that didn't belong to me, and now I was being stalked through messages. I stepped toward my car, but my feet felt glued to the ground. I scanned the dark spaces between the parked vehicles, half expecting to see a figure lurking in wait. Instead, I saw nothing. Just me and the oppressive silence of the night, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I forced myself to breathe, to think logically. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Somehow, the phone had ended up in my coat without any connection to my life. But as I considered it, the nagging feeling that it was tied to me, and my daily patterns gnawed insistently at my insides. With a surge of determination, I climbed into my car, locking the doors as I did so. I turned on the ignition, the engine humming to life, a false sense of security in its familiar growl. I glanced at the phone once more, debating on whether to throw it out of the window or keep it, hoping to uncover the truth behind it. Instead, I navigated to the message thread, my heart pounding as I felt a compulsion to respond. "Who are you?" I typed, my thumb shaking, and pressed send before I could second-guess myself. Almost instantly, the dots appeared, signaling a response from the unknown sender. "Someone who knows you." A shiver cascaded down my spine at the chilling simplicity of the words. I was not just being watched, I was being hunted. Panic surged, and I drove, the tires squealing slightly against the asphalt. I attempted to shake off the dread that clung to me as I navigated the streets, hoping the familiar surroundings would comfort me. Instead, the shadows seemed to deepen, and the streetlights flickered ominously as if holding their breath. I drove past my usual turn to the apartment, my instincts telling me to keep moving, to find a place where I could think clearly. Each message I received was a tight coil of fear wrapping around my chest. My heart raced, but I couldn't allow myself to succumb to fear. I had to confront this, to understand who was watching me and why. I pulled into a deserted gas station, the flickering neon sign casting a ghostly glow over everything. I parked near the entrance, keeping the phone on the passenger seat, its screen still lit like an eye watching me. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down, the air thick with an impending storm. As I sat there, I swiped through the messages again, my breathing shallow. "What do you want?" I typed, my fingers hesitant but defiant. Meet me where it started. A chill prickled the back of my neck as I processed the words. I knew exactly where that was. The old park on Maple Street, the place where we played as kids, where my friends and I had dared each other to climb the ancient oak tree. A place that now stood abandoned, overtaken by neglect and whispers of past torment. I could almost feel the shadows in that place beckoning me, eager to unfold their sinister secrets. The phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. I'm already here. My heart stopped, the realization slamming into me like a punch. I wasn't just being tracked, the game had already begun, and I was the unwitting pawn, drawn into a confrontation I never wanted. As I looked up, the night felt darker, more claustrophobic, and I understood that I had no choice. I had to go back. The shrill sound of the alarm clock pierced the silence of my bedroom, pulling me from a restless sleep. The faint light of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a dim glow across the room. My mind was still tangled with the remnants of yesterday, the gnawing unease that had settled into my bones. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, feeling the cool against my feet, and reached for the unfamiliar phone I had found in my coat pocket the night before. Gingerly, I picked it up, its cracked screen glinting under the morning light. The device was an older model, the kind that clung to the shadows of technology's evolution. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a mistake. Maybe I had grabbed it from someone at work, or perhaps it belonged to one of my friends. But as I turned it over in my hands, a deep sense of foreboding settled in. It felt wrong, like something that didn't belong to me. I switched it on, the screen flickering to life and revealing a wallpaper of a serene landscape that felt foreign and yet eerily familiar. I could see my own reflection in the glass, eyes blurry and surrounded by the remnants of another sleepless night. My gut twisted as I scrolled through the menus, trying to find clues about its original owner, but the phone was locked. A pattern of swipes danced in front of me, teasing yet impenetrable. As I prepared for work, my mind wandered. I couldn't shake the feeling that the phone was somehow connected to me, that I had been drawn into a story I hadn't signed up for. I hurried through my morning routine, barely tasting the coffee I gulped down. I felt like I was being watched, not by someone in the room, but from a distance, a far-off gaze that lingered in the back of my mind. The day dragged on, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I sat at my desk. I stole glances at the phone, which lay there like a dark omen. I resolved to leave it untouched until I got home. Yet, when lunchtime rolled around, I felt compelled to check it. The sight of the locked screen taunted me. I needed to know who it belonged to. I opened the device again and found it filled with messages, texts from an unknown number. My heart raced as I swiped through them. The words were cryptic, vague. I see you, one read. Another simply stated, don't try to hide. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. This was not a prank or a cosmic coincidence. Someone was tracking me, someone who knew I had this phone. Panic clawed at my throat. I tried calling the number but was met with a voicemail, eerie and void of any emotion. I sent a message back, my fingers trembling as I typed, "Who is this?" Almost immediately, the screen lit up with an incoming message. "You should have left it alone." The words felt like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. For the rest of the workday, I barely registered my surroundings. Coworkers came and went, their laughter a distant echo in my mind. I felt like a rat in a maze, a creature that had unknowingly wandered into danger. The once familiar walls of the office morphed into a confining cage, suffocating any rational thought. I needed to get out, needed to leave this place before it consumed me. As I drove home, the weight of the phone pressed heavily in my pocket, a constant reminder that I was not alone. Every glance in the rearview mirror made my skin crawl. The empty road felt as if it were lined with shadows, figures that flickered at the edges of my vision. I convinced myself it was paranoia, just tricks of the light, but the sensation gnawed at me like a ravenous beast. When I finally stepped through my front door, a sense of dread washed over me. It was too quiet, the kind of stillness that wrapped its icy fingers around my spine. I dropped my bag and took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I could still feel the phone's presence even when it lay motionless on the coffee table. I approached it cautiously, as if it were a sleeping animal that might bite if disturbed. Another message flashed on the screen. "You're not safe." My pulse quickened, blood pounding in my ears. I frantically scanned the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Yet, the atmosphere was thick, a palpable tension that cocooned me. I could sense the eyes of the unknown upon me, waiting for me to make a move. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone once more, my mind racing for solutions. Should I call the police? What would I even say? I was being stalked by a phantom, a whisper in the digital ether. What proof did I have? I considered turning it off, tossing it aside like a bad dream, but something stopped me. I needed answers. Just as I resolved to respond to the last message, the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile silence that enveloped me. I froze, heart thundering. Who could it be? I peered through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. A figure stood outside, obscured by the dim light of the evening. I couldn't recognize them, and the thought filled me with sheer terror. I backed away from the door, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. Hand shaking, I clutched the phone tightly as if it could offer me some semblance of protection. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "Open up," a voice called, low and steady. The voice sent chills down my spine, a dark echo against the walls of my mind. The world outside felt like a trap, a stage set for horrors I couldn't comprehend. And as the door rattled under the weight of a stranger's insistence, I realized I was no longer just a bystander in this twisted game. I was the prey, and the hunter was closing in. I had almost convinced myself that I had pocketed the phone by mistake, the product of a long day filled with mind-numbing meetings and hurried commutes. I left the office with my mind spinning, thoughts colliding like traffic at a congested intersection. The moment I got home, I tossed my coat on the kitchen chair, the phone sliding out and landing with a soft thud on the wooden floor. The screen cracked slightly as it hit, a jagged line slicing through the glass like a spider web. I picked it up, examining the unfamiliar device. It looked cheap, battered, and decidedly not my style. I contemplated just tossing it in the trash, but something held me back. A faint buzz vibrated through my fingers, almost like the low growl of a distant thunder. I hesitated, staring at the screen, illuminated now by a new message. The unknown number didn't ring any bells, and I felt a prick of unease creep up my spine. But curiosity gnawed at me. I pressed the button to unlock the screen, and the device sprang to life. Several messages filled the app, each one more chilling than the last. "I see you," read the first. A chill snaked through me, the words sending a shudder down my spine. I brushed it off as a prank, a sick joke played by some misguided soul. The next message came moments later, a splash of blue light illuminating my darkening kitchen. "Turn around." My breath caught in my throat. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the hallway, but nothing was there. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as I forced myself to breathe normally. It was just a coincidence, I mused, a cruel trick of fate. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the hairs on my arms standing at attention. "Who is this?" I typed, my fingers trembling on the cracked screen. A reply came almost instantly. "You really don't know, do you?" I stared at the words, feeling as if ice water had been poured into my veins. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The messages kept coming, each one more specific, more invasive. I know where you work, followed by, I saw you at the coffee shop yesterday. I slammed the phone down on the counter, its cracked screen reflecting my wide eyes back at me. I felt unmoored, like a ship without an anchor in a stormy sea. Who was this person? How did they know so much about me? Panic clawed in my throat as I tried to think rationally. I needed to report this. I grabbed my own phone, my hands slick with sweat as I dialed the police. The line rang before a voice crackled through. I explained the situation, my words tumbling out in a rush. The officer on the other end assured me they would look into it, but their tone held a hint of skepticism. "It's probably just a prank, sir," they said, but I could hear the slight crack in their voice. "Just try to ignore it." I hung up, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. Ignoring it was impossible. The unknown was a beast lurking just outside my door, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. Just then, the unfamiliar phone vibrated again. I picked it up, heart racing as I stared at the screen. "Look outside." I forced myself to exhale. I set the phone down and moved toward the window, feeling like a marionette on strings. Through the glass, the streetlights cast long shadows over the pavement, their yellow glow illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet, too quiet, like a world holding its breath. Nothing moved. Just the empty street, the silence pressing against my ears. I pulled back, feeling a rush of relief until I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, an indistinct figure standing under the streetlight. My heart raced. I stepped back from the window, panic surging through me. Was this stalker really outside, watching? I glanced down at the phone, the screen lighting up again. My hands were shaking as I read the new message. "I can see you, too." I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white against the wood. The figure outside shifted, then moved closer to my house. I couldn't breathe, adrenaline coursed through me as the implications sank in. I realized I had to act, had to get somewhere safe. I bolted toward my front door, locking it with trembling fingers. The sound of my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I crept back toward the window, peeking out through the curtains. The figure was gone. In its place, however, was a small, crumpled piece of paper left on my doormat. I squinted, trying to make out the details in the dim light. My heart slammed against my ribs as I recognized the shape of the message. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their gaze pressing down like a leaden shroud. I backed away, blood rushing in my ears, but I couldn't resist the urge to know. I had to see what they had written. I opened the door a crack, peering outside. The night was still, silent, as I reached down to grab the paper. My pulse thundered as I unfolded it, each creak of the hinges making my skin prickle. It simply read, "You're not alone." Not anymore. I stumbled back into the house, slamming the door shut, my mind racing with the terrible knowledge that I was not just being watched. I was being hunted. The cracked screen flickered in the gloom like a heartbeat, too close for comfort, too close to the truth. The chill of the evening air seeped through the thin walls of my apartment as I sat on the edge of my bed, the unfamiliar phone cradled in my hands. A soft, ghostly glow illuminated a cracked screen, jagged fissures creeping across the display like the veins of some dying creature. I had avoided touching it, but after that day at work, I felt its weight in my pocket, a constant reminder of something I was better off not knowing. I turned the device over, searching for clues that might tell me how it had gotten there. It felt wrong, not just being here, but being mine. The name etched faintly beneath the cracked glass, Lila, meant nothing to me. I had considered turning it in, perhaps finding a lost and confused owner, but now curiosity gnawed at me, insatiable and persistent. I couldn't resist pressing the power button. A soft chime filled the silence, and the screen flickered to life. It was filled with notifications, missed calls, texts, even a few social media alerts. Each notification felt like a taunt, a siren call to dive deeper into the unknown. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat quickening with each passing second. I swiped to unlock the screen, and an array of messages flooded into view. The most recent stood out, a terse and urgent text from an unknown number. "I know where you are." My breath hitched, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows of my room, a specter drawn by my reckless curiosity. I hesitated before typing a cautious reply. "Who is this?" My fingers trembled as I pressed send, the weight of my decision settling heavily in the pit of my stomach. I knew I shouldn't have engaged, that I was inviting trouble into my life, but the need for answers consumed me. Minutes felt like hours. I paced the floor, the phone clutched tightly in my hand as if it were a talisman. A response finally came through, slashing through my resolve with its chilling simplicity. "You shouldn't have it." I dropped the phone onto the bed, the sound echoing through my otherwise quiet apartment. "What the hell?" I muttered, my heart racing. Panic began to seep into my thoughts, punctured only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, a cruel reminder of time slipping away, wasted in this unfamiliar mess. My mind spiraled with dark thoughts. Was someone watching me? Had I unknowingly crossed paths with a stranger who now had my every move mapped out? I struggled to find clarity. I had felt eyes on me before, at work, in the subway, but I had always dismissed those feelings as paranoia. I fought to steady my breathing, reminding myself of the rational world outside the confines of this digital nightmare. It was just a prank, I reasoned. A sick joke from some bored teenager. Yet that small voice of doubt whispered back, echoing with the urgency of necessity. What if it wasn't? Still, curiosity nudged me back to the screen. The notifications piled up, each one abating more, thrumming in time with my racing heartbeat. I opened the messaging app and skimmed through the other conversations, but they were cryptic and disjointed. There was a thread with Lila's name at the top. It appeared benign at first, casual exchanges about lunch plans and weekend outings, but it quickly morphed into something darker. The tone shifted, slipping into terse warnings and threats. "You don't belong here. You should leave. I can help you." Each message dripped with foreboding, suggesting a descent into an abyss that I hadn't known existed. Suddenly, the phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the comforter. I nearly dropped it in shock. The unknown number had messaged again, "Get out before it's too late." I felt the blood drain from my face. With trembling fingers, I fumbled to silence the device, the sensation of dread coiling tightly around my throat. Night enveloped my small space, and I felt the walls closing in. I had to act. I remembered the fleeting shadows I had noticed lately, the rustle of movement just beyond my peripheral vision. Could they be connected? The weight of the world pressed down on my shoulders as I moved toward the windows, peering out into the dimly lit street below. As I scanned the area, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure lingered near the corner, cloaked in the shroud of night. My heart pounded, and I instinctively retreated, pulling back from the glass as if it were a barrier against whatever evil was lurking out there. I could hardly breathe. Who were they? Were they the sender? Or had they come for something else entirely? I turned back to the phone, its screen flickering ominously in the dark. I had to get rid of it. I snatched my coat from the chair, the fabric brushing against my skin like a warning. I could drive to the nearest police station, hand it over, but the thought of facing the officers with this absurd tale made my stomach churn. Instead, I would find a place to dispose of it, much like one would dispose of a body or a curse. I slid the phone into my coat pocket one last time, the weight heavy against my heart. As I stepped into the night, the air thick with uncertainty, each echo of my footsteps felt like a countdown. Outside, I glanced back at the shadow. It had moved, inching closer, but I couldn't remain frozen in place. I had to confront whatever nightmare had been summoned by that cracked screen, and the realization washed over me. I was no longer just an observer in this horror. I was its unwilling participant. The day had dragged on, the fluorescent lights of the office flickering like a heartbeat, reminding me of the urgency I'd felt since the moment I found that phone. I hadn't even wanted to think about it, but the weight of the unfamiliar object in my coat pocket had grown heavier as the hours passed. It was as if it had come alive, beckoning for my attention. I had tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the monotonous reports piling up on my desk. Every ping from my own phone sent a shiver down my spine, a reminder that I was tethered to another reality, one where I felt safe and mundane, far removed from the creeping dread that had settled in since I discovered the cracked screen. My thoughts raced as I tried to shake off the feeling that I was being pulled into something dark and unknown. As I walked out of the office, the air outside felt crisp and electric, charged with the unspoken apprehension that had gripped me. I recalled the messages that had appeared on the unfamiliar phone, the first one arriving shortly after I'd found it. Where are you? No name. No context. Just the empty void of an unknown sender. I had stared at those words, the essence of dread curling in my stomach like smoke. I had fought the urge to reply, instead opting to watch the screen for any further clues. Another message followed soon after. I'm getting closer. Closer to what? I had dismissed it as a cruel joke at first, but deep down, I felt the gravity of the situation. A shiver coursed down my spine at the thought who was sending these messages, and why. I had wanted to return the phone to Lost and Found, but the thought of someone reaching out, waiting for a response, had anchored my feet to the ground as if I were trapped in quicksand. The streets were dimly lit, and the shadows cast by the street lamps danced as I walked. My mind wandered back to the office, to my cubicle where a pair of eyes had seemed to linger on me too long. Had I missed something? Was this phone a trap? It was hard to shake the paranoia that had wrapped itself around me. Then, just as I reached the bus stop, my own phone buzzed. My heart raced as I fished it out, praying it was a message from a friend or a timely distraction. Instead, the screen lit up with another notification from the stranger's number. I can see you. In that moment, I felt the world tilt. The bus had pulled up, its tired engine humming like a beast ready to swallow me whole. I glanced around, the shadows taking on a life of their own, elongating and creeping toward me. The impulse to run surged through me, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe. People were milling about, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of my reality. I pocketed my phone and boarded the bus, my heart thundering in my chest. I found a seat at the back, forcing my eyes away from the windows that framed the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that the cracked screen had opened a door to something sinister. The bus jostled along the bumpy road, the driver's voice a distant murmur that blended with the rhythm of my panic. I stole a glance at my phone, the cracked screen now feeling more ominous than before. What if it was a mistake to not engage? Had I made things worse by staying silent? The thought gnawed at me, a relentless whisper that urged me to take action. Just as I made the decision to delete the messages, my screen lit up again. Don't think you can hide. The words sent a surge of ice through my veins. I glanced around the bus, the faces blurred by fear and confusion. I had to get off. I had to get away. My mind raced, considering my options. The bus slowed, and I saw my stop was approaching, my chance to escape this suffocating atmosphere. I stumbled off the bus, nearly tripping as I hit the pavement. The chill of the night air wrapped around me, grounding me, but as I walked down the sidewalk, the oppressive feeling returned. My phone buzzed again, and I slammed it down into my pocket as if that would silence whatever malevolence it contained. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the street was empty, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I hurried down the street, my heart pounding not just from fear but from the exertion of keeping my composure. The dim light of my apartment building was a beacon of safety, yet a shadow flickered near the entrance, and I froze. Someone was there. I could feel it. I took a step back, scanning the area with wild eyes, but the figure melted into the darkness as I approached. I pressed the button for the elevator, my pulse quickening as I waited. As the door slid open, I hesitated, peering inside. When I stepped in, I felt the prickling of eyes on my back. I turned, half expecting to see the sender of those messages, but the hall was empty again. The doors closed, trapping me in a small, metal box, ascending to the unknown. My phone buzzed once more, and I snatched it out, staring at the screen. My breath caught in my throat as I read the next message. "You're not alone." The elevator jolted to a stop, the lights flickering, and the silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I swallowed hard, the fear coiling in my gut like a serpent ready to strike. Story 6, Last Train to Nowhere. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting a sickly yellow hue over the nearly deserted train station. The digital clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, mocking my predicament with each agonizing beep. I had missed my train by mere seconds, dashing to the platform only to watch the scheduled departure slip away into the night. My heart sank as I stepped back onto the cold, hard tiles of the waiting area, the loneliness of the station enveloping me like a shroud. It was late October, and the brisk air seeped through the cracked windows. Outside, the wind howled, sending leaves swirling in chaotic patterns. I checked my phone for the umpteenth time, but the battery icon blinked back at me, empty. I cursed under my breath, knowing I would have to wait for the next train, which was still hours away. The station was eerily silent, save for the distant sound of a train horn echoing through the darkness. I shuffled to a row of worn plastic seats, their surfaces cold and uncomfortable. The overhead announcements had long ceased, replaced by an oppressive quiet that heightened my senses. My mind wandered, considering my options. I could call a cab, but my wallet was almost empty, and the thought of spending money I didn't have made my stomach twist. As I sat there, trying to distract myself with thoughts of home, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned slightly, my heart racing as I caught sight of a man standing a few yards away. He was leaning against one of the station's columns, his face obscured by the dim light. I squinted, trying to make out his features, but anxiety seized me as I realized he was watching me. I quickly glanced away, pretending to occupy myself with my bag while my mind raced. He didn't look like anyone I knew, yet there was something unnerving about his stance, the way he remained still and fixed on me. I felt an uncomfortable tingle creep along my spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the draft in the air. After a few moments, I risked another glance. The man hadn't moved, his eyes were still locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. What was he waiting for? The questions spiraled in my mind. Was he just another traveler, lost in his own thoughts? Or was there something sinister lurking behind his calm exterior? I considered leaving the waiting area to find a restroom or to explore the station, but I dismissed the idea. Leaving my seat felt like a challenge, a move that could provoke whatever intentions lay beneath his stillness. I focused my gaze on the clock again, willing the minutes to pass, but they crawled by. The man remained rooted to the spot, watching me like a hawk watches its prey. I felt the urge to stand up and confront him, to ask if he needed help or if he was lost. Yet, the idea of engaging him felt dangerous. He was a stranger in the dark, an unknown threat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for me to make the first move. The station's silence was interrupted only by the sound of my breathing, loud and uneven. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to chase away the cold that had settled deep inside me. Suddenly, the man shifted, pushing himself off the column and taking a step forward. My heart raced, panic surging through my veins. I took a deep breath, my fight or flight instinct kicking in. I felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in. Even the exits seemed to dim with the flickering lights overhead. I had to get out of here, but where could I go? I hesitated, weighing my options. If I made a break for the main entrance, would he follow? In the back of my mind, I knew I was overreacting. This was a small, rundown station, not the set of a horror movie. But the way he stared at me, his eyes penetrating the dimness like daggers, left no room for rational thoughts. I could not convince myself that he was harmless. I decided to act. Standing up slowly, I forced myself to look confident despite the fear that curled in my stomach. I tightened my grip on my bag and moved toward the exit, keeping my gaze straight ahead, pretending he didn't exist. As I approached, I felt the weight of his gaze shift, a cold thrill running through me. My pulse raced, and I steeled myself for whatever might come next. But just as I reached the door, the man spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a knife. "You shouldn't leave just yet." I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle. My heart pounded in my chest, an alarming rhythm that drowned out all rational thought. I turned slowly to face him, my voice trembling as I asked, "What do you want?" He stepped closer, and I instinctively backed away, pressing against the cool glass door. The shadows cast by the flickering lights twisted around him, making him appear even less tangible. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Instead, it sent a wave of icy fear crashing over me. "I just wanted to make sure you're safe," he said, his tone eerily calm. "It's dangerous out there." A chill snaked down my spine, and I fought the urge to scream. I had to get out of there. The walls of the station felt like they were closing in on me, and I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the stillness. As he took another step closer, I realized one thing: I was not safe. And it was time to run. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting a sickly pallor over the empty benches and cracked tiles of the train station. I leaned against the cold metal support beam, my breath making small clouds that evaporated quickly in the stale air. The last train had rumbled away nearly an hour ago, leaving me marooned in this desolate place. Panic crept in like a thick fog, and I found myself glancing at the digital clock on the wall, desperate for the minutes to pass, desperate for something to change. I had missed my connection because I'd lingered too long at the coffee stand. The barista had been chatty, and the warmth of the cafe had lulled me into a false sense of security. Now, that same sense of warmth felt like a cruel joke as I stood in the chill of the station, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, an eerie companion to the solitude. I should have called a cab, should have done something instead of waiting there like a fool. But each time I considered leaving the safety of the station, dread tightened its grip on my throat. I was acutely aware that I wasn't alone. Lurking at the far end of the platform was a man, his figure partially obscured by the shadows. He was dressed in a long coat, too long for the weather, his hands thrust deep into his pockets. I caught a glimpse of his face. It was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to gleam in the darkness. At first, I thought he was simply another late-night traveler, but as I watched him, I noticed something unsettling in his stillness. He didn't seem to be waiting for a train at all. Every few moments, he shifted his stance but never moved closer to where I stood. His gaze remained fixed in my direction, an intensity that sent chills skittering across my skin. I looked away, forcing myself to focus on anything else, but the feeling of being watched wormed into my thoughts like a parasite. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to think rationally. Maybe he had missed a train too. Maybe he was merely waiting for someone. But the way he lingered, as if he were tethered to the platform by an invisible string, suggested something more sinister. I could feel him probing the air between us, like a predator sizing up its prey. I shifted my weight, trying to act casual, but my hands trembled slightly as I fished in my bag for my phone. The screen lit up, and I cursed under my breath when I saw the low battery icon. The last text I had sent was to my friend, telling her I'd be home soon. Maybe I should text again, tell her I was stuck. But what could she do? I hesitated, uncertainty swirling in my gut. Glancing back at the man, I saw that he was now taking slow, deliberate steps toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I watched as he crossed the space between us, the echo of his footsteps reverberating off the tiles. My flight response kicked in, urging me to run, but my feet felt anchored to the ground, paralyzed by fear. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Are you waiting for someone?" His question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I forced myself to respond, my voice a shaky whisper. "No, just missed my train." The man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something in my response. I wanted to turn and flee, but the instinct to be polite kept me rooted in place. He stepped closer, the faint scent of cigarettes and something else, something metallic, drifting toward me. "Bad luck," he said, his tone deceptively gentle. "These late-night stations can be dangerous. You should be careful." My blood ran cold. "I'll be fine," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I took a step back, but he mirrored my movement, closing the distance. "Are you sure you don't want me to call for help?" he asked, his smile widening in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I could help you get home, if you'd like." A knot twisted in my stomach. Panic rose like bile in my throat. I looked around the station, desperate for anyone else to be there, anyone to witness this exchange. The shadows seemed to stretch and swell around us, swallowing the world outside, leaving just the two of us in this dark, little pocket of reality. "No, thank you," I managed, my voice firmer now. I took another step back, feeling my heart race. "I'll just wait for the next train." He chuckled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "The next train isn't coming for a while. You could be waiting alone for a long time." His gaze was unnerving, as if he could see right through me, past my skin and into the depths of my fear. Something in me broke, and the fight or flight instinct kicked in again. I turned sharply, heading toward the exit, my footsteps fast and loud in the stillness. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps echoing, keeping pace. I didn't dare look back, fear propelling me forward as I burst through the station doors into the night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me moving. As I glanced over my shoulder, my heart plummeted. He had followed me outside, lingering just at the station's edge, a dark silhouette against the glow of the lights. I quickened my pace, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I had to put distance between us. The streets were deserted, and the nearest streetlight flickered ominously ahead. I could still feel his gaze burning into my back, a reminder that even in the fastness of the night, I was not truly alone. My mind raced as I navigated the shadows, searching for safety. The man had been right about one thing: the night felt dangerous, and I had no idea how far I would have to run to escape what lurked behind me. The cold had settled in thick by the time I leaned against the stained wall of the station, my breath fogging the air in front of me like a ghost. The clock on the wall ticked raggedly, its hands creeping toward midnight, each second echoing in the vast emptiness around me. I had missed the last train, and the reality of my situation pressed down like a wave on my chest. The fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, flickering every few moments as if in protest against the oppressive silence that enveloped the station. I glanced at my phone again, just a blank screen. No signal. No hope. My heart raced, a frantic drumbeat reminding me that the world outside seemed too vast and too dark. In the dimly lit corners of the station, shadows twisted in grotesque shapes, and I thought of the news story I had read just days earlier. A woman had gone missing in a town not far from here. They had found her car abandoned in a lot, the lights still on, as if she had stepped out for just a moment. My skin prickled at the thought. I shoved my phone deep into my pocket and shivered. That was when I noticed him. I had passed him earlier, sitting on a bench with his head down, shoulders hunched as if he were asleep. But now he was watching me, his eyes glinting in the light, like a predator sizing up its prey. I recoiled slightly, instinctively moving closer to the ticket counter, even though no one was there. What was he doing here? The station was nearly deserted. It felt as though the world had turned its back on us. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he was just waiting for a train as well, even though the schedule showed nothing arriving for hours. But something in his gaze made my gut twist. His expression was too intense, too focused, and I could feel the weight of his stare even across the empty space. I fiddled with my coat, adjusting it for warmth and comfort, while I stole glances at him through the corners of my eyes. He hadn't moved, just sat there, watching me, waiting. The more I stared, the more he seemed to lean into the light, as if inviting shadows to hide his intentions. My heart thudded louder, drowning out the clock's relentless ticking. I took a deep breath, attempting to shake the sensation of dread coiling around me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. It was late, and exhaustion was clouding my judgment. After all, people stared. It was human nature. Yet, that rational thought did little to quell the rising tide of anxiety inside me. I glanced back at the man. He had shifted slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, the light catching the scruff on his jaw. Was he smiling? My stomach dropped. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, a practiced facade that sent chills racing down my spine. I turned away and walked toward the vending machines, my footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. I pretended to study the various snacks, my mind racing with options. I needed to find a way to contact someone, to get out of here. I glanced back at him, willing him to have moved, but he remained rooted, unmoving, his gaze locked onto me. Should I approach the station's emergency phone? Or would that draw his attention further? I felt trapped, like a mouse in a maze, every choice leading to more uncertainty. I stepped away from the machines, my heart pounding in my ears. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the glass panes, and I could almost hear the world calling to me, begging me to escape this place. But the man remained, a looming threat in the shadows, his presence suffocating. I quickly walked back toward the platform, hoping to find some semblance of safety. A flickering light buzzed above, just like the clock, filling the air with an unsettling hum. I glanced down the tracks, catching a glimpse of the night beyond the station. It was dark, a black abyss stretching far beyond the beams of the sparse lighting. Suddenly, his voice cut through the silence. "Are you lost?" I spun around, my breath catching at the sound. He had risen, moving closer with an unsettling confidence. I could see his features clearer now, dark eyes, unkempt hair, a coat that swallowed his form. He was too close. Too curious. I stammered, looking desperately for an escape route. "I'm just waiting for my train. It should be here soon." He smiled again, that same unreadable smile, and I could feel the warmth in my cheeks faltering, leaving me chilled to the bone. "You really think a train is coming? At this hour?" The way he asked sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through me. I forced myself to hold his gaze, to show no weakness, even as I felt the urge to flee. "I have to go," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I have someone waiting." He stepped closer, invading my space. "Do you? Or are you just saying that because you're afraid?" My pulse quickened. I needed to get away from him. I stepped back, my instinct screaming at me to run. He followed, the space between us diminishing further. I turned and sprinted toward the escalators, my heart hammering against my ribs. Wait. His voice echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I raced toward the stairs, my breath quickening as the fear pushed me forward. I had to get out of here. As I bolted, I heard him laugh, a sound devoid of humor, filled instead with something dark and hungry. I could feel him behind me, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a countdown to something terrible. I surged up the escalator, my mind racing with the thought that I might never see daylight again. The night was far from over, but I promised myself I would fight. Escape was all that mattered now, and I wouldn't go quietly. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows along the desolate platform. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands mocking me with the relentless march of time. 12:34 a.m. I had missed the last train home, and now I was marooned in this nearly empty train station, surrounded by oppressive silence that seemed to amplify my own rising panic. I should have left work earlier. I had known that the schedule was tight, but the last-minute report had required my attention. Now, with the station echoing my loneliness, I felt every shadow creep closer. I hesitated at the edge of the platform, the chill of the night air wrapping around me like an unwanted embrace. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, my eyes darting toward the few benches that lined the platform. There was a lonely figure seated at the far end, partially obscured by the dim light. He looked older than me, maybe in his late 30s, his tattered jacket hanging off him like a shroud. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his stillness unnerved me. I turned away, forcing myself to focus on the distant sounds of the city outside the station, the soft hum of cars passing by, but the weight of his gaze bore down on me as if he were aware of every thought racing through my mind. I dug my nails into my palms, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. People wait for trains. It was a train station, after all. Yet, as I glanced back, he had shifted slightly, as if to turn toward me. I took a step back, instinctively moving closer to the ticket booth, even though it was unmanned and locked. My heart raced. The man hadn't done anything overtly threatening, but every instinct in my body screamed to flee. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a miracle, a signal, a friend to call. Nothing. The battery icon blinked ominously at me, red, critical. It had been a long day, I told myself. I was tired, anxious, and likely overreacting. I shuffled my feet, trying to exude some semblance of calm as I walked toward the vending machine, hoping to distract myself with the prospect of a soda. As I approached, I could feel the man's eyes on me, heavy and probing. I focused on the vending machine, the unyielding glass that separated me from the sugary drinks and snacks. As I fished through my bag for coins, I caught a glimpse of him in the reflection. He had moved closer, much closer. My stomach dropped, and I cursed under my breath, stepping back, ready to bolt. "Hey," I heard him say, his voice gravelly, echoing in the stillness. I froze, the coins rattling in my hand as a knot tightened in my throat. I didn't respond, just stood there, staring at the machine as if it held the answers to life. "Are you lost?" he asked, and I could hear the faintest tremor of amusement in his tone. I swallowed hard. "No," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped fully into the light, and I could see him better now, the scruffy beard, the slumped shoulders, the unkempt hair. But it was his eyes that struck me the most, dark and hollow, as if he had never known warmth. "Just waiting for a friend," he continued, taking another step closer. Out of instinct, I took a few steps back, my mind racing with every possible scenario, from a friendly encounter to something far more sinister. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I missed my train." He nodded slowly, a strange smile creeping across his face. "Doesn't take much to miss a train at this hour." Time seems to slip away, doesn't it? His words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced around, searching for any sign of other people, but the platform remained lifeless, save for the two of us. I should go, I said, trying to sound assertive, but my voice cracked. Why don't you sit down? I won't bite, he said, motioning toward the bench beside him. No, really, Tell me your name first, he interrupted, his tone shifting, more demanding now. Unease slithered through me. I don't think that's necessary, I stammered, grasping my bag tighter. Fine, he replied, shrugging as if my refusal meant nothing, but you should know this isn't the safest place to be alone. I felt the air grow thick with tension. I'm not alone, I shot back, desperate for a shred of confidence. There are cameras here. He laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed in the empty space. Cameras don't stop the darkness. Without thinking, I turned to leave, my feet moving instinctively, but he reached out, fingers brushing against my arm. A spark of electricity shot through me, igniting every flight or fight instinct I had. I jerked away, my breath coming faster. Stay, he said softly, almost pleadingly. But I could see the truth in his eyes, the vacant hunger that lay behind them. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted toward the exit. I barely felt my feet touch the ground as I dashed through the turnstile, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear him call after me, but I didn't stop. Outside, the cool air bit at my skin, but I welcomed it, my eyes searching for any sign of safety. I turned down the street, breathless and trembling, the darkness swallowing me whole. Behind me, the station loomed, but I wouldn't look back. I couldn't. The chill of the night air seeped through the cracked windows of the train station, making me shiver despite my coat. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second echoing like a whispering ghost. I leaned against the cool metal bench, staring at the empty platform where only the flickering lights cast long shadows. It had been an hour since my train left without me, and the weight of the night pressed down harder as the minutes dragged on. I replayed the moment in my head, the frayed edges of the memory stinging my mind. The ticket dispenser had been stubborn, rejecting my card again and again. By the time I managed to procure a ticket, the train was already pulling away. The disappointment had morphed into anxiety, fueled by the stark realization that I was alone in this desolate place. The station had once bustled with life, but now it felt more like a tomb, the remnants of travelers long gone. I glanced at my phone, no signal. I could have called someone, anyone, but I felt too isolated, too stuck in this twilight limbo. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, yet the unease gnawed at the edges of my mind. As I shifted in my seat, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A man stood at the far end of the platform, cloaked in shadows. He seemed to be watching me, his posture unnaturally still. I squinted, trying to discern details, but the dim light obscured his features. I turned away, forcing myself to focus on the empty timetables. Maybe he was merely another stranded traveler, waiting for the dawn to illuminate the path ahead. Yet, the instinctive prickle at the back of my neck told me otherwise. With trembling hands, I pulled my coat tighter and glanced back. The man remained, as if he had materialized from the dark itself. I tried to rationalize my fear. Perhaps he was waiting for someone or simply enjoying the solitude of the night. Yet, the intensity of his gaze felt heavy, as if he were mining the depths of my soul. My heart raced as I recalled the stories of women vanished without a trace, their only crime being the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I stood up, the noise echoing harshly against the walls, and paced the length of the platform. Each step felt heavy, like treading through thick fog. I needed to escape this oppressive atmosphere. I considered the restroom. It was a chance to gather my thoughts, to take a moment away from the man watching me from the shadows. As I walked past him, I stole a glance, my breath hitching in my throat. He wore a dark jacket, his hair unkempt, with deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce through me. He didn't smile, didn't move. Just stood there, a figure carved from the night. I quickened my pace, feeling the overwhelming urge to flee. Inside the restroom, the fluorescent lights buzzed angrily, illuminating cracked tiles and peeling paint. I splashed cold water on my face, desperately trying to wash away the dread that clung to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting, calculating my next move. I peered through the grimy mirror, half expecting to see him standing just behind me, but thankfully, the room was empty. I took a deep breath, steadied my racing heart. I would wait him out. As long as I stayed alert, I could figure out a way out of this mess. Maybe I could flag down a taxi or find another station closer to home. When I returned to the platform, my heart sank. The man was no longer where I had left him. I scanned the area, adrenaline pumping through my veins. He could be anywhere, lurking in the shadows. The lights flickered above, casting erratic shadows as I resumed my place on the bench. I studied the entrance, half hoping to see the glow of headlights cutting through the darkness. Time dragged, and I felt like a marionette, strings cut, left to dangle in the air. My mind raced through scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. What if he had followed me? What if he was in the restroom, waiting for me? The door slid open, and I flinched as a gust of wind swirled inside, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city. My breath caught as I saw him again, emerging from the shadows, now standing much closer. He had moved without a sound, silently closing the distance between us. "Are you lost?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it sent shivers down my spine. His breath hung in the air, visible and ghostly. My throat tightened. "I'm fine. Just waiting for the next train," I stammered, forcing my voice to remain steady. He took a step closer, his intentions hidden behind a mask of calm. "You don't have to wait. I can help you." "No," I thought, panic swelling. I needed to get out, to break free from this horrifying encounter. I backed away, my heart pounding as I met his gaze. I'd rather wait alone. A flicker of something, frustration, anger, crossed his features. "That's not safe. This place isn't what it seems. You don't belong here." Those words echoed in my mind, filling me with dread. I had to make a choice. I turned and fled, racing toward the exit, the sound of my footsteps a frantic symphony in the night. Behind me, I heard him call out, but I didn't look back. I barreled through the doors into the cool night air, the station fading behind me like a nightmare I hoped to escape. The world outside was vast and dark, but it felt safer than the shadows I left behind. I could still hear him in my mind, a specter lurking in the recesses of my memory. As I moved away from the station, I stole one last glance back, half expecting to see him standing there, watching. But the platform was empty, a void echoing the fear that still thrummed in my veins. I had escaped, but the question lingered, had I truly evaded him, or was this merely the beginning of another terrifying chapter?